Produced by Liang Gu, Modern History of China, author, Jiang Tingfu. Summary. The Chinese nation entered a special period in the 19th century. Before this, although the Chinese had long-standing relations with foreign races, those foreign races were all ethnic groups with lower culture. Even if they take over the Central Plains, they just took advantage of the temporary civil strife among the Chinese to temporarily seize power. By the 19th century, the situation was completely different, because the British, American, and French countries that came to East Asia at this time were by no means comparable to the Huns, Xinbei, Mongols, Japanese pirates, and Manchus. It turns out that human development can be divided into two worlds. One is Asia in the east, and the other is Europe and America in the west. Although the two had a relationship before the 19th century, that relationship was intermittent and dispensable. In the Eastern world, China is the leader. We are the big brother. We regard ourselves as the big brother, and other countries, including Japan, also recognize our superior status. By the 19th century, it was not our little brothers in the Eastern world who were causing trouble for us, but the Western world, which we had never met and whose cultures were fundamentally different. Of course, the Chinese during the Daoguang period of Jiaqing did not know that Western world. Until now, we dare not say that we fully understand Western civilization. But there are a few things we can be certain of. First, the essence of the Chinese nation can be compared with the best nations in the world. The intelligence of the Chinese people is not inferior to that of any other nation. Second, although China's products are not as complete as those of Russia and the United States, they are still above the level of other countries. Third, the abolition of feudalism into prefectures and counties by Qin Shi Huang and the great empires of the Han and Tang dynasties in our country fully prove that our nation has political genius. Therefore, judging from the people and the place, China could have accomplished a lot. However, in the 19th century, why did our nation encounter unprecedented difficulties? The first is because our science is inferior to humans. In the competition between people and the competition between nations, the most decisive factor is the level of knowledge. The competition between scientific knowledge and non-scientific knowledge is like the competition between cars and foreign cars. During the Daoguang period of Jiaqing, the scientific foundation in the West has been laid, but our ancestors are still writing eight-legged essays there, talking about yin and yang and the 5 elements. Second, the West began to use machinery to generate money and fight wars in the middle of the 18th century, while our industry, agriculture, transportation, and military still retain what they have been since the Tang and Song dynasties. Third, the Western political situation in the Middle Ages was very similar to China's Spring and Autumn period, and the situation after the Renaissance was very similar to our Warring States period. In the life of great powers vying for supremacy, Westerners developed fervent patriotism and profound national concepts. We cling to our family values and hometown values. Therefore, in the early 19th century, although the countries in the West were small, they were united as solid as a stone. Although our country was large, they were like a piece of loose sand and had no power. All in all, by the 19th century, the Western world already had the so-called modern culture. The Eastern world is still stuck in the Middle Ages, and we are falling behind. In the past 100 years, the Chinese nation has only one question, and that is, can the Chinese people modernize? Can you catch up with Westerners? Can science and machinery be used? Can we abolish our concepts of family and hometown and organize a modern nation-state? If we can, our nation will have a bright future. If we cannot, our nation will have no future. Because in the world, in all countries, those who can accept modern culture will become rich and powerful, and those who cannot, without exception, will suffer miserably. And the sooner you accept it, the better. Japan is a good example. Japan's original land was no more than one province of China. Almost all of the original culture was learned from China since the Sui and Tang dynasties. In the past 40 years, Japan has been able to become a first-class country in the world. This is because Japan accepted modern culture very quickly. We can also take Russia as an example. Russia in the 15th century. It was also a backward country in the 16th and 17th centuries, so at that time Russia had almost no status on the Western stage. However, at the end of the 17th century, during our Kangxi reign, Russia was fortunate enough to have Peter the Great, who changed his name and surname in the name of an autocratic emperor. He went to Western Europe incognito to learn shipbuilding and steelmaking. Later, he invited many Western European technicians to Russia to help him with his reforms. At that time, many Russians opposed him, especially the National Essence Party in the capital Moscow, the same below. He fought hard to the end regardless of everything. He even moved the capital to a remote but coastal location next to the Neva River, the same below, because he wanted to be close to the sea and easily communicate with Western Europe, the birthplace of modern culture. The foundation of Russia's modernization was laid by Peter the Great, one of the great Russian national heroes. Therefore, today's Stalin, the same below, still respects him. Turkey's fate is also enough to show the power of modern culture to influence the country's prosperity. In the early 19th century, the Turkish Empire spanned Europe, Asia, and Africa, and the Turks were also brave and capable of fighting. However, within 100 years of the 19th century, other countries' science, machinery, and nationalism made rapid progress, while Turkey only knew how to be conservative. Therefore, Turkey was slaughtered by the European powers. After 1878. There are also a few young people in Turkey who have realized that reform is necessary, but they encounter great resistance. First, the king of Turkey, like the Qing dynasty in our country, has no sincerity in reform. Second, because of official corruption, funds for creating new undertakings have been embezzled and wasted by bureaucrats. The country has not benefited from the new undertakings, and the people have imposed many exorbitant taxes and levies. It seems that the more reforms the country gets, the weaker and poorer it becomes. Regarding this point, Turkey's modern history is also very similar to China's modern history. Third, the conservative force in society is so strong that one person even advocated reform. 10 people objected. All in all, Turkey's reform in the late 19th century was half-hearted, incomplete, and without a complete plan. The result was a disastrous defeat in the last World War, and the country was almost destroyed. After the Great Calamity, the Turks united and supported the national leader Kemal, and thus began to revive. Kemal served the country wholeheartedly, and no one knew he was there. He understood the trend of the times and knew that in order to save the country, he must completely accept modern culture. Not only did he advocate science and industry, he even reformed Turkish writing. Because the old Turkish writing was too difficult, children spent too much time and brainpower on writing, and the amount they could spend on practical learning would inevitably be reduced. Now the foundation for Turkey's founding is considered solid. Japan, Russia. The modern history of Turkey is roughly as mentioned above. These three countries accepted modern science, machinery, and nationalism, and thus revived and became rich and powerful. Now we are going to study our recent history. We need to pay attention to how imperialism oppresses us. We must carefully study the resistance plan in each period. In particular, we must analyze the extent and reasons for the success or failure of each plan. If we can find out the lessons of our country's modern history, we will be able to contribute even more to the war of resistance and nation building. Chapter 1: Suppressing the Barbarians and Fubbing the Barbarians. In the first section, Britain invites China to establish diplomatic relations. Before the 19th century, China and the West had no diplomatic relations. The West does not send envoys to China, and we do not send ambassadors or ministers to foreign countries. The reason for this is very complicated. First, China and the West are far apart, and transportation is not convenient. The ships that came to China from the West were all sailing ships. There was no Suez Canal at that time, and transportation between China and the West had to go around the Cape of Good Hope in the south of Africa. It took 3 months to get from London to Guangzhou. Therefore, the business is not big either. The only goods Westerners bought from China were silk, tea, and other luxury goods. Our economy is self-sufficient and does not require any Western products. So at that time, our international trade always had a big surplus. Under such circumstances, diplomatic relations were unnecessary. There is another reason, that is, China does not recognize the equality of other countries. When Westerners come to China, we always treat them as Ryukyus or Koreans. If they don't come, we won't force them. They will respect China as a superior country and regard themselves as a vassal. This issue of decency and ceremony has become a major obstacle to diplomatic relations. China would never be accommodating. At that time, China did not feel the need to contact foreign countries. Moreover, the foreigners were not a barbaric country and did not know etiquette, justice, and shame. What was the benefit of interacting with them? They came here greedy for profit, and the heavens showed favor to them and allowed them to do business, just to restrain and care for them. If they don't keep to themselves, the Celestial Empire will suppress the barbarians. At that time, China did not know about diplomacy and only knew about suppressing and pacifying the barbarians. Politicians are divided into factions simply because some advocate suppression and others advocate appeasement. The trade system at that time was also special. Western merchants were limited to Guangzhou. In the late Ming and early Qing dynasties, Westerners visited Zhangzhou, Quanzhou, Fuzhou, Xiamen, Ningbo, and Dinghai. Later, partly because of the inconvenience and partly because of the prohibition by Qing court decrees, the so-called one-port trade system was established. In Guangzhou, outsiders are not free either. Summer and autumn are the buying and selling seasons. They can live in Shizenhang in Guangzhou. After buying and selling, they have to go to Macau for the winter. The 13 banks are the 13 companies designated by the Chinese government to do business with foreigners. A member of the 13th line is always the leader of the 13th line and is also the government's negotiator. All orders from Guangzhou officials were passed on to foreign businessmen by the general manager of the business, submissions from foreign businessmen to officials were also forwarded by the general manager of the business. According to the law, foreign businessmen cannot ride in sedan chairs when they come to Guangzhou. In fact, the officials are very accommodating. When they lived in Shizenhang, according to the law, they were not allowed to travel casually on the 8th day of the lunar month. 1828. You can go to the Flower Land in Hunan under the leadership of the general manager. They cannot bring weapons into Guangzhou. Barbarian women are also not allowed to enter to prevent the gradual entrenchment. The most bizarre prohibition is that outsiders are not allowed to buy Chinese books or learn Chinese. The Chinese teacher of Dr. Morrison, the first Jesuit missionary, had to bring a shoe and a bottle of poison with him every time he went to teach. The shoe meant that he was going to buy shoes, not to teach. The poison was be prepared to commit suicide if the government finds out. At that time, China's customs was autonomous, and the customs duties set by the imperial court were originally very light, with an average of only 4%. The Qing government did not attach much importance to the customs revenue, but the unfavorable regulations imposed by officials were extremely onerous, and they probably even had to collect regular taxes. 20% of the price. Chinese law stipulates that tariffs should be made public. In fact, officials keep secrets so that they can be manipulated at will. Outsiders go through a kind of bargaining negotiation every time they pay taxes, so they are very impatient. China at that time did not attach much importance to legal rights. Our officials are unwilling to intervene in the civil and criminal cases between foreigners and foreigners within China. That is to say, they voluntarily give up their legal rights within the country. For example, in the 19th year of Qianlong's reign, a Frenchman killed an Englishman in Guangzhou. The prefecture and county in Guangzhou initially advised them to mediate among themselves. Later, due to the insistence of the British, the government began to investigate. Civil cases between China and foreigners are always settled by both parties because both parties are afraid of the pain of litigation. If a Chinese kills a foreigner, the government will never show favoritism. The murderer will always be punished with death, so the outsiders are very satisfied. Only the cases of foreigners killing Chinese are troublesome. China requires foreigners to kill Chinese people. Before the middle of the 18th century, most outsiders obeyed. After that, they refused to kill Chinese people and refused to be tried by the Chinese government because they felt that the punishments in China were too severe. The trial procedures were too clumsy. Although outsiders were initially dissatisfied with our trade system, they felt that since it was China's rule, they had no choice but to tolerate it. By the end of the 18th century, the last year of Qianlong and the beginning of Jiaqing, the attitude of outsiders gradually changed. At this time, most of China's overseas trade was in the hands of the British East India Company. Among outsiders in Guangzhou, the British had occupied a leadership position. The Industrial Revolution in Britain had already begun at this time, and the handicraft industries of the past were slowly turning into machine manufacturing. Overseas markets are becoming more and more important to the British national economy and people's livelihood. China's restrictions on trade are considered by the British to be most detrimental to British commercial development. At the same time, Britain had defeated France in India, and the entire Indian peninsula was under British control. It will be easier to develop in East Asia in the future because India will be the base for development. At that time, Europeans regarded Emperor Qianlong as a model enlightened monarch. The British believed that the difficulties encountered in doing business in China were caused by local officials in Guangzhou. If there is a way that Qianlong can know, he will be willing to reform. 1792, the 57th year of Qianlong's reign, was the year when Emperor Qianlong turned 80. If the British took the opportunity to send envoys to celebrate his birthday, they would have an opportunity to negotiate and promote Sino-British friendship. Guangzhou officials knew Qianlong's vanity and tried their best to encourage the British to send envoys to celebrate his birthday. So Britain sent Lord Macartney as its plenipotentiary envoy to China. The preparations for Macartney's envoy were very painstaking. The envoy traveled on a first-class warship and take the guard. The gifts given to Qianlong were all made from the finest British products. The purpose is simply to let China know that Britain is a rich, powerful, and civilized country. The British government's instructions to Macartney required him to try his best to accommodate Chinese etiquette and customs, but he must show equality between China and Britain. There are several purposes for negotiation. First, Britain is willing to send a plenipotentiary ambassador to Beijing. If China is willing to send an ambassador to London, the British court will treat it with the best courtesy. Second, Britain hopes that China will open additional trading ports. Third, the United Kingdom hopes that China will have fixed and open customs tariffs. Fourth, Britain hopes that China will give her a small island where British merchants can live and store goods, just like the Portuguese in Macau. Emperor Qianlong was also very happy to welcome the British envoy, but Qianlong treated him as a vassal tribute envoy and asked him to kneel down and worship. Macartney initially refused, but later agreed conditionally. His condition was that when China sent envoys to London in the future, they must also kneel down and pay homage to the British king, or China sent envoys to kneel down and pay homage to the portrait of the British king he brought. His purpose is nothing more than to show the equality between China and Britain. China did not accept his conditions and refused to kneel down. Emperor Qianlong was very unhappy. After the interview, he asked him to leave Beijing and return to his country. As for Macartney's requests, China rejected them all. That British peace negotiation was a complete failure. At the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars were going on in Europe, and Britain had no time to take into account the development of commerce in the Far East. When the war was over, Britain sent a second envoy to China. The purpose is roughly the same as the first time. However, Zheching's treatment of the British envoys was far less than that of Qianlong. Therefore, not only did the British envoys fail diplomatically, but they also had bad feelings towards me personally. After these two failures, Britain knew that peaceful negotiations would not work. The relationship between China and the West is special. Before the Opium War, we refused to give equal treatment to foreign countries. After that, they refused to give us equal treatment. By the 19th century, we could only find a way out in international life, but the Chinese in the Jiaqing, Daoguang, and Xianfeng years, regardless of Han and Manchu, still tried to close themselves off. To maintain the glorious position of the past dynasties in the Eastern world, we simply deny the increasingly powerful Western world. If we boldly step into the life of the big world, we need a high degree of reform, otherwise, we will not be able to compete with the great powers. But we have the manpower and material resources to keep pace with outsiders. As long as we are determined, we can gain a more glorious position in the great world of the 19th century. When we study the modern history of our nation, we must understand that modern diplomatic relations are our great difficulty. It is also a big opportunity for us. In the second section, the British engage in opium trade. Before the 19th century, there were no large quantities of foreign goods that the Chinese wanted to buy. Only a small number of things brought to China by foreign merchant ships were goods, and most of them were cash. Economists at that time. Everyone, both Chinese and foreign, believes that the export of gold and silver is harmful to the country. Countries are trying to find ways to increase the export of goods and the import of gold and silver. After years of experiments, foreign businessmen in China have discovered that opium is a high-quality commodity. Therefore, the British East India Company encouraged planting and controlled transportation and marketing in India. In the early years of Qianlong's reign, about 400 boxes of opium were imported every year, each box weighing about 100 kilograms. Qianlong banned mainland merchants from selling, but it had no effect. In the early years of Zheqing, imports increased tenfold, to about 4,000 boxes a year. Zheqing ordered a ban on imports, but due to official corruption and difficulties in censorship, sales continued to increase. Daoguang was the most distressed about opium and the most determined about banning smoking. At the beginning of his accession to the throne, he issued a strict ban. However, in his era, the import of opium increased the fastest. In the first year of Daoguang, 1821, only 5,000 boxes were imported. In the 15th year of Daoguang, the number increased to 30,000 boxes, worth about 18 million yuan. China's money leaked out in exchange for this harmful and useless opium, which was considered by the whole country to be a serious danger to the national economy and people's livelihood. Some gentlemen in Guangdong feel that the smoking ban must never be implemented because laws are used by subordinate servants for profit. The more stringent the legislation, the more bribes will be demanded. They advocated increasing tariffs while promoting cultivation and using domestic products to offset foreign products. Over time, foreign businessmen would no longer be able to make profits and would stop importing opium. In the 14th and 15th years of Daoguang's reign, this group's discussion was quite popular, but except for Su Naiji, no one dared to risk the disapproval of the world and openly advocate this method. In the 18th year of Daoguang's reign, Huang Juezi wrote a memorial, loudly advocating strict prohibition. His method is to strictly prohibit smoking. He said that if no one smokes, there will be no one to sell, so those who smoke should be punished with death. Please give the emperor a strict edict that from a certain day of this year to a certain day of next year, you are allowed to give up smoking for 1 year. If you still smoke after 1 year, you are a rioter who does not obey the law. He will be punished severely and there will be no injustice. Allow. Check old examples. Those who smoke opium only have a cane and a cane. Those who do not point out the crime of trafficking in opium are punished with 100 canes and 3 years of migration. However, they are all guilty of living crimes. The pain of breaking off addiction is worse than the shackles and sticks, so I am willing to violate the punishment and refuse to give up. If the crime is punishable by death, the punishment will be even more painful if he quits his addiction. I know that he would rather quit his addiction and die at home. He did not want to be punished and died in the city. However, the emperor is cautious in using punishment, and is afraid that if the legislation is too strict, the innocent people will be affected if they criticize each other. However, Whether opium smoking is addictive or not will be determined immediately after the official trial. If you are not a person who smokes opium, it will not be profound. Hatred cannot be falsely accused of good deeds, and there is no way to hide the fact that the fruit is addicted. Therefore, although punishment is used, there is no harm. After the memorial was published, Daoguang ordered the governors of each province to discuss it. Although they did not openly oppose Huang Juezi, they always felt that his method was too drastic. They said that drug addicts only harm themselves, while traffickers harm many others, so it is a crime of trafficking. More serious than the crime of smoking, Guangzhou is the main importer of opium cigarettes, and the big dealers are there. If you want to ban smoking, you should start in Guangzhou. Only Lin Zexu, the governor of the Two Lakes, fully agreed with Huang Juezi's ideas and suggested various implementation methods. Daoguang decided to strictly prohibit both smoking and selling. He also sent Lin Zexu as an imperial envoy to Guangzhou to investigate the smoking ban. Duke Lin Wenzhong was the most prestigious and conscientious official in the political circles at that time. The scholar bureaucrats especially trusted him, and his self-confidence was not small. Although he had never handled barbarian affairs before, he said to foreigners, "This minister lives in the Fujian Sea." All the foreigners' tricks have long been understood in detail. In fact, people at that time were somewhat polite about the issue of banning smoking. In their private letters, they acknowledged the difficulties of banning smoking, but in their memorials, they always catered to the wishes of the superiors and sang a high profile. This kind of dishonest behavior is one of the major problems of the scholar-bureaucrat class in our country. In fact, banning smoking is an extremely complex and difficult issue. Even without foreign interference, it would be extremely difficult to ban smoking. What's more, during the Daoguang period, the British were absolutely unwilling for us to implement a smoking ban. At that time, opium was not only a great benefit to trade, but also a major source of fiscal revenue for the Indian government. Britain is no longer satisfied with our arrogant and closed-door attitude. If it wants to settle accounts with us, if we give Britain any excuse because of the opium problem, Britain will never hesitate to use force against us. We call that war the Opium War, and the British call it the Trade War. There are reasons for both sides. Regarding the opium issue, we strive to ban it, while the British hope to maintain the status quo. We attack and the other defends. Regarding trade issues, the British side strives to gain greater opportunities and freedom, while we insist on maintaining the status quo. They attack and we defend. In terms of the general trend of the world, that war was inevitable. In the third quarter, East and West fight. Lin Zexu arrived in Guangzhou on the 25th of the first month of the 19th year of Daoguang's reign. After a week of thinking and planning, he took action. He told foreigners, "You should not harm others if you want to benefit yourself. Why bring the opium smoke that your country does not eat into the inland to defraud people of their money and harm their lives?" He asked the foreigners to do two things. First, take advantage of yourself. Opium that has arrived in China but has not yet been sold. Send all the goods to the officials. Secondly, issue a ganjia, declaring that he will not bring opium to China in the future. If he does bring any opium, once it is found out, he is willing to turn all the goods away from the officials and the person will be punished. Foreigners do not know Lin Zexu's character and think that he is just an ordinary bureaucrat. When he first takes office, he always makes a notice and talks about propriety, justice, and integrity. Isn't that really the asking price? Once the price is agreed upon, the transaction can proceed as usual. So they wait and see and bargain. Little did they know that Lin Zexu was not that kind of person. If opium is not exhausted for a day, and this minister does not come back for a day, I swear to stay with this matter forever, and there will be no reason to stop. On the 10th day of February, when outsiders still refused to exchange cigarettes, Lin Zexu issued an order to cut off Guangzhou's sea traffic, sent troops to surround the 13th bank, evacuated all Chinese in the bank, and then prohibited all entry and exit. In other words, Lin Zexu made the 13 lines a prison for foreigners. And no one was allowed to sell grain to them. At that time, there were about 350 foreigners in the 13th line, including the British commercial supervisor Elliot, Captain Charles Elliot. Of course they have to suffer quite a lot there, cooking, washing dishes. You have to do all the cleaning yourself. However, there was still food. Outsiders had stored a lot of it, and merchants secretly helped. Ilu wanted to compromise, but Lin Zexu insisted on both of his demands. At that time, Britain only had 2 small warships in the Chinese Ocean, and the sailors on board could not reach Guangzhou. Ilu could not resist and had to surrender. The method of his surrender is worthy of our attention. He did not order the British businessmen to hand over the cigarettes to Lin Zexu. He taught the British businessmen to hand over the cigarettes to him, and he gave the merchants receipts as a commercial supervisor, and they changed hands in a flash. The opium of British merchants became the opium of the British Empire. Ilu handed over a total of 20,280 boxes, totaling 2.1 million kilograms, and captured them all in one fell swoop. This was Lin Wenzhong's victory, and Emperor Daoguang was also very happy. His memorial to criticize Lin said, "Your loyalty to the emperor and your love for the country are as clear as day in the domain and have been transformed into the outside world." Outsiders still don't fully believe that Lin really wants to ban smoking. They think Lin will make a fortune this time. Lin built 2 ponds on Human Beach. There is a culvert in front and a ditch in the back. First, water is diverted into the pond through the ditch, and salt is sprinkled in it. Then the soot is put into the box, and then lime is thrown in to boil it. The soot soup is boiled and the particles are collected. The smell is so bad that you can't smell it with your nose. When the tide recedes, the culverts are opened and flowed into the sea with the waves, and then the bottom of the pond is washed away without leaving a drop. It lasted for 23 days, and everything was destroyed. Every day, civil and military officials monitored it. Outsiders came to watch and remembered the incident in detail, deeply praising the imperial envoy's frankness and selflessness. At that time, Ilu reported the details of the cigarette collection to the British government and waited for the government's instructions. Lin Wenzhong's work is done and it seems he can rest. Moreover, the imperial court transferred him to be the governor of Liangjiang, but he refused to go. He said, "The opium that has arrived has been destroyed, but it can still come in the future." He wanted to be thorough, and the way to do this was to ask foreign merchants to produce ganja and not engage in opium trading in the future. This law did not agree, so the 2 sides clashed again. Lin Zizi felt very confident. He said that the British's combat effectiveness was no more than this. The British's legs and feet were tightly bound and it was inconvenient to bend or stretch them. The forts in Human have all been rebuilt. He blocked Humenku with a large iron chain. He also thought that foreigners must have tea and rhubarb, so he banned the export of tea and rhubarb, which would lead to the death of outsiders. That autumn and winter, the Guangdong Navy had several conflicts with two small British warships. Lin reported to the court that China had won a great victory, so the whole country was optimistic. After receiving Eliot's letter, the British government sent Plenipotentiary Admiral George Eliot, led the navy and army to China. The British Foreign Secretary at this time was Lord Palmerston, a well-known imperialist who loved success. He not only demanded compensation for opium but also military compensation, and demanded that all old trade restrictions and diplomatic inequalities be swept away. Ilu went to Guangdong in the summer of the 20th year of Daoguang's reign, 1840. If Britain knew China's national conditions well, Ilu should have decided against Lin Zexu in Guangzhou. Because Lin is the leader of the main war faction. But the British strategy was not here. Ilu was in Guangdong and did not attack. He only announced a blockade of Haikou. The Chinese explanation is that Britain is afraid of Lin Zexu. After the blockade, Ilu went north and sent troops to occupy Dinghai. Dinghai has no armaments. The Chinese feel that this is a victory without force. After that, Ilu led the main fleet to Daguku. After the news of the fall of Dinghai reached Beijing, the Qing court was extremely angry. Daoguang ordered the deployment of troops from Shaanxi, Gansu, Yunnan, Guizhou, Hunan, and Sichuan provinces to the coastal provinces, causing the whole country to panic. Troops need to be mobilized from above. Please pay me below. Emperor Daoguang was most afraid of spending money, so his trust in Lin Zexu decreased. On July 22, he scolded Lin Zexu in his edict. Not only did it end up being unrealistic, but it also gave rise to many waves. Thoughts outweighed anger. Let's see what words you use against me. The person presiding over the negotiations in Tianjin at that time was Qishan, the governor of Zhili. He worked hard to know himself and his enemy. He sent people to British ships to investigate British armaments under the guise of negotiation. He felt that the British ships were far more powerful than China. Steamboats from other countries have no wind and no tide, and they go with the current and against the current. All can fly across. Under their gun position, there is a stone millstone with a central machine shaft. Just move the millstone and the gun will follow its direction. Looking back on China's equipment, he found it ridiculous. Shanhaiguan's gun was still, things that were made before were barely steamed and washed for later use. The so-called natural dangers of the sea and the Yangtze River have been taken over by outsiders. Those who serve as military officers are all civil servants. Although their writing is good, they are not familiar with military equipment. So he decided to pacify the barbarians. The letter from the British Foreign Secretary to the Chinese Prime Minister made Qishan feel that his policy of pacifying the barbarians was very promising. That letter, the first half of the book, is full of criticisms of Lin Zexu, saying how cruel and arbitrary he was. The second half presents British demands. Qishan judged the letter from a Chinese perspective and felt that it was just a piece of paper. Lin Zexu treated the British too harshly, and the British were unfair, so he asked the emperor to avenge them. He took advantage of his plan and told the British, last year, the imperial envoy Lin and others banned cigarettes. He failed to appreciate the great emperor's upright intentions, and as a result he was deceived by others and handled inappropriately. His crimes must be investigated in detail and punished severely. But the matter is all in Guangdong, and there is no way to handle it here. Your commander-in-chief and others should return to Shannon immediately, and wait for the imperial envoys to rush to Guangdong to investigate and deal with justice, and they will definitely be able to redress the grievances. As for the level of compensation, China will give some amount so that the British representatives can return home with dignity. As for changing the trade system, he told the British that after the matter was resolved, the British could continue to trade as usual without any changes. Ilu and Ilu did not want to fight in the north. Therefore, Qishan agreed to return to Guangzhou to negotiate and expressed his willingness to withdraw the troops in Dinghai. Emperor Daoguang was extremely happy. He felt that Qishan's 3-inch tongue could persuade the British Navy and Army to withdraw, which was far more troublesome than Lin Zexu's Meng Lang. So he ordered the troops in all provinces in the interior to return to their original defense. To save money and waste. At the same time, Lin Zexu was dismissed from his position and Qishan was taught to replace him. After Qishan arrived in Guangdong, he found that he had taken things too easy. The British insisted on paying compensation and ceding Hong Kong or adding a treaty port. Qishan thought that rather than ceding territory, it would be better to open additional trading ports. However, they were afraid that the court would not agree, so they had to negotiate the price slowly. The Japanese and British were impatient when the delay was delayed, so they opened fire in early December. After the fall of Shajiao in Tai Kok, Qishan Sui signed a treaty with Yi Lu, paying an indemnity of 6 million yuan, ceding Hong Kong from the United Kingdom, and giving equal treatment to the United Kingdom in the future. Daoguang refused. He scolded Qishan for being stubborn, dismissed him from his post, confiscated his property, and sent him to the official position. At the same time, he dispatched soldiers to Guangdong for suppression. The British government was also dissatisfied with the law and sent another representative and troops to China. From this moment on, China and Britain were determined to take charge of the war and would never negotiate with each other. The British attitude is simple. If China does not agree to her request, she will cease the war. Daoguang was also very stubborn. If one army was defeated, he would mobilize another army. Some Chinese soldiers fled before going to battle, and some were defeated and would rather die than surrender. There are generals who exaggerate before a battle and then retreat immediately before the battle. There are also those who died after exhausting themselves, such as Guan Tianpei, Yu Qian, and Hai Ling. It goes without saying that weapons are inferior to people, discipline is not as good as people, and spirit is not as good as people, it goes without saying. Some people were willing to become traitors, and some were forced by hunger and cold to join the British Army as coolies. It's the summer of the 22nd year. When the British Army was about to attack Nanjing, the Qing government knew that it had no choice and could no longer resist, so it accepted the British request and established the Treaty of Nanjing. In the fourth quarter, the nation lost 20 years. The fundamental reason for the failure of the Opium War was our backwardness. Our weapons and army are the armies of the Middle Ages, our government is the government of the Middle Ages, and our people, including the scholar official class, are the people of the Middle Ages. Although we try our best to resist, we will eventually fail. This is natural and cannot be escaped. From the perspective of national history, The military defeat of the Opium War was not yet a fatal injury to the nation. After failure, trying to reform without understanding the reason for the failure is the fatal injury to the nation. If the reforms from the Tongji and Guangxu years were moved to the Daoguang and Xianfeng years, our modernization would be 20 years earlier than Japan's. The modern history of the Far East will completely change its appearance. It is a pity that people during Daoguang and Xianfeng years did not learn the lessons of military defeat. After the war, they were exactly the same as before the war, indifferent and arrogant. It wasn't until the end of Xianfeng's reign that the British and French forces invaded Beijing, and then a few people woke up. I knew I had to learn Western skills. So we say that the Chinese nation has lost 20 years of precious time. Why didn't the Chinese during the Daoguang period start reforming after the Opium War? Although the reasons are extremely complex, they are worthy of our study. First, Chinese people are too conservative. Our country's culture has a history of thousands of years and is deeply rooted. It is not easy for the Chinese people to recognize the need for reform. Second, our country's culture is the lifeline of the scholar-bureaucrat class. The shaking of culture is the shaking of the rice bowl of scholar-bureaucrats. As soon as we implement the New Deal, gentlemen with imperial examination backgrounds will be in danger of losing their jobs. No wonder they oppose it. Third, the Chinese scholar-bureaucrat class, the intellectual class and the bureaucratic class, lacks the most independent and fearless spirit. No matter in that era, there are always a few people who see things farther and clearer. But they were afraid of Qin Yi's criticism and kept silent. Lin Zexu is a good example. There are actually two Lin Zexu. One is Lin Zexu in the minds of scholar-bureaucrats, and the other is the real Lin Zexu. The former Lin Zexu was the leader of the suppression, and he was victorious in every battle. The methods he used were all ancient Chinese methods. Unfortunately, the treacherous minister Qishan accepted bribes from the British and expelled him. Before the British went to Lin, they did not dare to fight in Guangdong. After going to Lin, of course they would start a war. Therefore, the scholar officials thought that China's failure was not because China's ancient methods were ineffective. It's because the treacherous ministers have harmed the country. It was natural for the scholar officials at that time to have such an impression. Lin's memorial was full of his self-confidence. Unfortunately, since the fall of Dinghai in the summer of the 20th year of Daoguang's reign, Lin had not had the opportunity to compete with the British. No wonder the Chinese refused to admit defeat. Lin Zexu really came to his senses slowly. After he arrived in Guangdong, he knew that Chinese weapons were inferior to those of the West, so he tried his best to buy foreign cannons and ships. At the same time, he sent people to translate foreign publications. He gave Wei Mozhan the materials he collected in Guangdong. Wei later compiled these materials into Haiguo Tuji. This book advocates using barbarians to control barbarians and using barbarian weapons to control barbarians. Later, Japanese literati translated this book into Japanese, which promoted Japan's reform. Although Lin had this awareness, he was afraid of Qin Yi's criticism and did not dare to advocate it publicly. The Qin court banished him to Ili. On the way, he wrote to a friend. His cannon is as far as 10 miles away. If my cannon cannot reach him, his cannon will have already reached me first, which means the weapon is defective. They fired cannons like muskets fired in the mainland, and they fired continuously. After I fired one shot, when I had to move around, I fired another shot. If you are not familiar with this skill, you may want to be good and familiar with it, but there will be no other people who have a deep and skillful ear. If we don't do this, we will mobilize millions of brave men from far away, fearing that they will only be used to coax the approaching enemy. If the ship is facing south and facing north, only the Navy can pursue it. Can the troops on shore move immediately? Although there are many soldiers in the mainland who have been in the military for a long time. And they all met face to face. It seems that we are 10 miles or 80 miles apart, and we have never heard of anyone fighting each other without seeing each other. Su Chang said that the key to suppressing bandits is to have good weapons and skilled skills, and to be brave and courageous. The first thing is to use the cannon. If you leave this thing alone, it will really make you Han's hands tied. There is nothing you can do. This is his personal letter. Written in September of the 22nd year of Daoguang. He asked his friend not to show it to anyone else. In other words, the real Lin Zexu doesn't want others to know. No wonder that although he later served as governor of Shaanxi and Gansu and governor of Yunnan and Guizhou, he was always unwilling to openly advocate reforms. He let the scholar officials who presided over the Qing dynasty sleep in their dreams. He allowed the country to weaken day by day without sacrificing his own reputation to fight against the current times. Lin Wenzhong is undoubtedly the best product of China's old culture. He still thinks that his own reputation is more important than national affairs, let alone others. The scholar-bureaucrat class refuse to admit defeat. They certainly do not advocate reform. Although Qishan and Xieying, who advocated pacifying the barbarians, clearly saw the disparity in strength between China and foreign countries and publicized it publicly, the scholar-bureaucrat class did not believe them. Moreover, they had no self-confidence and no confidence in the nation. They just let nature take its course and did not picture cheer up. No attempt to reform. We do not blame them because they are blameless. Section 5, The Unequal Treaty begins. The Sino-British Treaty, signed in Nanjing on August 29, the 22nd year of Daoguang's reign, was nothing more than the outline of the new diplomatic relations and new trade system after the war. The Human Treaty of the following year provided for detailed rules. We know that the entire post-war situation should be studied together with the two treaties. We should pay attention to the following points. First, the compensation is 21 million taels. Second, cut off Hong Kong. Third, open Guangzhou, Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo. Shanghai is a treaty port. Fourth, customs tariffs are detailed in the treaty and cannot be modified without the consent of both countries. This is the so-called agreement tariff. Fifth, British people in China are only subject to British laws and British courts, which is the so-called extraterritorial jurisdiction. Sixth, Chinese and British officials have equal exchanges. What people at that time felt most distressed about these terms was the five-port trade. They felt that it was no longer easy to guard against outsiders when they were trading in one port of Guangzhou. Now that there are 5 ports of trade in Guangzhou, outsiders can run rampant all over the world and are hard to guard against. Until the late Qing dynasty. Literati who are worried about the country all regard the 5-port trade as the cause of future disaster. Among the 5, they regard Fuzhou as the most important, while Shanghai is not valued by China and Britain. Of course, people at that time were opposed to the cession of land, and it should be opposed. But Hong Kong had no commercial or defense importance before it was ceded. When the British first mentioned Hong Kong, Beijing did not know where Hong Kong was. People at that time were opposed to the cession of territory, not the cession of Hong Kong. Agreed tariffs and extraterritoriality are at the heart of what we have considered in recent years to be unequal treaties. But people at the time didn't see it that way. Extraterritoriality, in the eyes of people in the Daoguang era, was nothing more than letting barbarians control barbarians. They think that is the most convenient and hassle-free way. As for the agreed tariff, they think it is also a convenient and trouble-free method. The amount of tax that should be paid on each kind of goods is clearly stated in the treaty, which can eliminate disputes. Those responsible for negotiating the treaty, such as Yilabu, Chiang, and Huang Antong, knew that the exorbitant taxes and miscellaneous taxes imposed by local officials in Guangdong before the war were one of the causes of the war. Wouldn't it be clear that tariffs are now clearly stipulated as a way to remove the firepower once and for all? Moreover, the new tariff averages 5%, which is slightly higher than the old independent tariff. The person responsible for negotiation calculated at the customs revenue will be higher in the future than before. So they were complacent, thinking that their diplomacy was successful. In fact, they sacrificed the country's sovereignty and caused a lot of harm. All in all, the Chinese during the Daoguang period did not understand international public law and the international situation at all, so they fought for what they should not fight for and gave up what they should not give up. We concluded this kind of treaty with Britain because we had no choice but to do so. If other countries come to demand the same rights, how will we deal with it? During the Opium War, the country was divided into two factions, the suppressing barbarians faction and the pacifying barbarians faction. The former was led by Lin Zexu, and the latter was led by Qi Shan. After the defeat of the war, the Fui faction certainly gained power. The person in charge of this faction is Mu Zhonghe, the Minister of Military and Aircraft, and those outside are Yilabu and Chiang. After China and Britain signed a treaty, the United States and France sent representatives to China to request a treaty with our country. Of course, the Fui people are not willing to fight with the United States, and France was at war again, so they decided from the beginning to give equal treatment to Americans and French people. They said that if China did not give it, people in the United States and France could pretend to be British people to do business, and we would have no way to find out. If this continues, the Americans and the French will rely on the British. They will definitely unite with the British to deal with us. If China gives the United States and France trade rights, then the United States and France will definitely be grateful to China. We may also contact the United States and France to deal with Britain. Moreover, Yilabu and Chiang believed that China's trade was limited. This limited trade is not allowed to be monopolized by the United Kingdom, and part of it is allowed to be divided between the United States and France. This does not hinder China. Why not make China a favor? In order to avoid the jealousy of other countries, Britain has long stated that it welcomes equal competition from other countries. Therefore, the United States and France were able to make peace with China. The root cause of unequal treaties is partly due to our ignorance, and partly due to the fact that our legal system has not reached the level of modern civilization. In the sixth section, the suppressing faction reared its head again. Before the Opium War, Guangzhou had been trading with outsiders for more than 300 years. It seems that people in Guangzhou should know more about foreign situations and be more at peace with outsiders than Chinese elsewhere. In fact, this is not the case. After the trade of 5 people, only people in Guangzhou have the worst feelings and the most conflicts with outsiders. The reasons are complex. First, the British had been oppressed in Guangzhou for many years and could not vent their anger. When they won the battle, they felt that the day had come for them to vent their anger. They could not calmly forgive the Chinese people for suffering the pain of the war, so they were naturally dissatisfied with them. Of hatred. Second, local officials and businessmen in Guangdong felt the greatest blow to their private interests from the Treaty of Nanjing. Before the Opium War, because Chinese and foreign trade was concentrated in Guangzhou, local officials, regardless of size, had the opportunity to make a fortune. After the Treaty of Nanjing, their unexpected financial resources were blocked. No wonder they hate foreigners. The same goes for businessmen. Before the war, silk tea from Jiangsu and Zhejiang was sold to foreigners by the 13th Bank in Guangzhou via land route through Jiangxi and Meiling. According to outsiders' estimates, the Wu family's Yaihexing had a fortune of more than 80 million before the war. Probably the richest capitalist in the world at that time. After the Treaty of Nanjing, outsiders went directly to Jiangsu and Zhejiang to buy silk tea, without passing through Guangzhou. Among the 5, Shanghai is prospering day by day, while Guangzhou is declining. Not only wealthy businessmen are affected by it. Even workers are affected directly and indirectly. No wonder the people also hate foreigners. One of the manifestations of xenophobia is the killing of foreigners. When they went to play in the countryside, the villagers took them by surprise and killed them. Chiang knew that this kind of vendetta would definitely cause disaster. So try your best to defend and never tolerate. He strictly enforced the laws of the country and executed murderers. As a result, the scholar officials called him a foreign slave. They said, the government and the people should be united in dealing with the outside world. How can we oppress the people in order to comply with the barbarian sentiments? Therefore, the status of Chiang in Guangdong is becoming more and more difficult every day. In Guangdong, there is also the problem of outsiders entering Guangzhou city. According to common sense, it seems to be of no great importance to allow foreigners to come to Guangzhou. From the perspective of outsiders, there seems to be no loss in not going to the city of Guangzhou, but the issue of entering the city has turned into a peace and war issue. In Shanghai, there are no such disputes at all. After the Treaty of Nanjing, when outsiders first arrived in Shanghai, they rented private houses in Shanghai. Later, they felt that the streets in the city were narrow and the sanitary conditions were not good, so they requested that a section of land be designated outside the city as a residence area for outsiders. Shanghai Daotai also felt that it was too complicated to manage because of its overcrowded Chinese style, so it designated a small plot of land to the north of Yangjingbang as a residential area for outsiders. This is the origin of the Shanghai Concession. Guangzhou 13th Street was originally outside the city. Before the Opium War, outsiders were not allowed to enter the city. Guangzhou people simply regard the city as a sacred place. If foreigners come in, it would be a loss of dignity. Outsiders also strive for morale. They think that by not allowing them to enter the city, they are looking down on them. Chiang tried his best to mediate between outsiders and the people of Guangzhou, but unexpectedly the two sides became more and more violent. In the 27th year of Daoguang's reign, the British troops came to the city. Asked to enter the city, Qieying had no choice but to allow outsiders to enter the city in 2 years. He hoped that within 2 years, or if the relationship between China and foreigners could improve, entry into the city would not be a problem. But at that time, many people attacked the Qieying, so Daoguang transferred him to Beijing and promoted Su Guangjin, governor of Guangdong, to governor of Guangdong and Guangxi. Daoguang's edict to Su clearly expressed his attitude. The importance of Xinjiang lies in reassuring the people, and if the people's support is maintained, foreign aggression can be averted. Later, when there were disputes between the people and barbarians, they should not be accommodating, as this would lose the support of the people. As for the consideration of modifications, it is carefully weighed and reviewed by the supervisor of the department. In the general period, we can only live up to our mandate by being honest and managing the people's sentiments, and by controlling the barbarians' affairs. After Su Guangjin was promoted to governor, he wrote a letter asking Lin Zexu how to control the foreigners. Lin replied, "The people's support can be used." Daoguang's edict and Lin Zexu's answer were both high-profile and empty talk in the tradition of the scholar official class. It is of course suicidal to attack outsiders based solely on public sentiment. People's support cannot be lost, but what do ordinary people know about international relations? Politicians should be responsible for guiding public opinion. If there is no guidance, or if the guidance is not effective, this is a failure of politicians. Su Guangjin was also afraid of Qing Yi's accusations. He also takes his own reputation more seriously than national affairs. At that time, the governor of Guangdong, Yi Mingchen, was more stubborn than Su Guangjin. They inherited Lin Zexu's mantle, and their rise to power was the beginning of the suppression of barbarians. In the 29th year of Daoguang's reign, Su's appointment to enter the city expired 2 years later. The British made demands under the treaty. The scholar bureaucrats and people in Guangzhou were unanimously opposed. Su Guangjin was hesitant at first, but later had no choice but to obey public opinion. Yi Mingchen firmly opposed the implementation of the treaty from the beginning. Their approach is twofold. First, they do not trade with the British. Second, organize the people. At this time, the British were unwilling to break with China over a dispute of temper, so they took no other action other than declaring that they would retain their treaty rights. Yi thought this was their great victory, and they reported to Beijing afterwards. From the 27th of the first lunar month to the 20th of March, residents are considered workers. Shopkeepers will choose partners who are strong and reliable to supplement them. Door-to-door registration is required, and recruitment from outside is not allowed. Funds were publicly prepared, equipment was manufactured, fences were added, and a total of more than 100,000 people were recruited. If nothing happens, everyone will go about their work. If something happens, they will stand up to defend themselves. No one with a halberd or a halberd can be seen in the bright light. Secretly, they are all trying to resist the insult. Zhu Pai, I didn't expect you to have such a wonderful effect at first. A city with a united will is stronger than gold and stone. It can use its power to defeat bandits internally and police barbarians externally. To commemorate the victory, Emperor Daoguang rewarded Viscount Su Guangjin with hereditary double-eyed flower feathers and Baron Yi Mingchen with hereditary flower feathers. Daoguang also issued a special edict to encourage the people of Guangzhou. The people in eastern Guangdong are known as brave. In recent years, he has gained a deep understanding of righteousness, has the courage to know the right way, and is a god of solid guidance. This is also due to his strong nature. I think about the power of Yi Dai. How can I be moved in it without pity? At the beginning of the 30th year, 1850, Dao Guang died and Xianfeng came to the throne. During the Xianfeng period, there was a civil war between the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom at home, and the suppression of barbarians faction became more powerful externally. In May of the 30th year, a censor, Chao Lutai, wrote a memorial. The investigation of Yiwu-Lin in eastern Guangdong began and ended with Su. Both ministers were respected by the British and foreigners. Last year Lin Zexu begged for leave to return home. This spring, I traveled to Jiangxi to recover from illness. In order to prevent the stubbornness of the British barbarians from changing today, I should ask for an order to order Lin Zexu, the governor of Jiangxi, to come to Beijing quickly. After waiting for your majesty to see him, I asked him to assist in the affairs of the barbarians, so that the Song dynasty could return to China as Prime Minister Sima. If the spirit has not recovered, you can also take care of yourself in Beijing, and do not return home suddenly. I know that the British and foreigners will be swept away by the wind, and there is no way to use any tricks, but they will never have to worry about the end of the day. Xianfeng also admired Lin Zexu very much and immediately ordered Lin to come to Beijing to teach him. Lin was lucky. He fell seriously ill and died shortly afterwards, and his reputation was thus preserved. Section 7. The suppression faction collapsed. Lin Zexu died, and Su Guangjin left Guangdong to fight against the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. The person responsible for diplomatic affairs in Guangdong is Yi Mingchen. He looked down upon outsiders very much and naturally refused to give in. As for outsiders, they feel that the rights they have obtained are not enough, and they hope to open additional trading ports. The old five only included the coasts of the four provinces of Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Fujian, and Guangdong. Now they have to go deep into the Yangtze River and go to North China. Secondly, they have to send envoys to Beijing. In addition, they hope that Chinese local officials will not refuse consular exchanges with foreign ministers. Finally, they demanded the reduction of tariffs and the abolition of lijian. These demands, except for the last, are not of a serious nature. However, during the Xianfeng period, the Chinese felt that taxation could be accommodated. As for the ambassador in Beijing, trade in the Yangtze River and North China, and the exchanges between officials and outsiders, all matters were related to the life and death of the country. Absolutely non-negotiable. In the fourth year of Xianfeng, 1854, Britain and the United States jointly requested to amend the treaty. At that time, China did not have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and all diplomacy was handled by the Governor-General of Guangdong and Guangxi. Yi Mingchen's way of dealing with it was not to negotiate. Outsiders asked to see him, but he refused to do so. Representatives from the United Kingdom and the United States went to Jiangsu to find the governor of Liangjiang, and he advised them to return to Guangdong to find Yi Mingchen. When they later arrived in Tianjin, the local authorities only allowed the emperor to petition the emperor for some relief or exemption from various taxes, but refused to do anything else. All in all, there is simply no way for outsiders to enter. They knew that the only way to amend the treaty was war. In the sixth year of Xianfeng, 1856, Yi Mingchen sent troops to board the Yarrow ship registered in Hong Kong to search for pirates. This gave the British an excuse to start a war. Soon, French missionary Father Ma was killed in Shilin, Guangxi. Yi Mingchen didn't handle it well and offended France again. So the British and French forces came to settle accounts with us. In the winter of the 7th year, the British and French forces first attacked Guangdong. The popular sentiment that the scholar-bureaucrat class relied on was actually powerless. The British and French not only invaded Guangzhou, but also captured all the governors and governors. Yi was later escorted to India and died in Calcutta. Governor Bai Gui came out to act as a puppet of Britain and France to maintain local security. The people not only did not resist, but also helped the British to carry the treasury money of the Fantai Yamen onto British ships. In 8 years, the British and French forces arrived at Daguku. Negotiation failed. So attack. We had no choice but to sign the Treaty of Tianjin and accept the demands of Britain and France. So Britain and France withdrew their troops. The Qing court was never willing to accept the envoy in Beijing and trade on the Yangtze River, and always wanted to find ways to recover. The Qing court sent Guiliang and Huashana to Shanghai to negotiate customs regulations. In fact, they want to cancel the Tianjin Treaty. To achieve this goal, the Qing government was prepared to pay a high price. As long as Britain and France gave up their envoys in Beijing and opened commercial ports on the Yangtze River, the Qing government was willing not to collect customs duties at all in the future. Fortunately, Guiliang and He Guiqing opposed this method, hence the Treaty of Tianjin. Not redeemed. On the other hand, the Qing court sent Prince Horkin Seng Jelinkin to set up defenses in Daegu. Seng Jelinkin was one of the famous brave generals at that time, and he was very serious in his work. In the 9th year, representatives from Britain and France went to Daegu again, preparing to go to Beijing to exchange the ratification certificate of the Tianjin Treaty. They had heard in advance that China was going to amend the Treaty of Tianjin and fortify Daegu, so when they went north, they brought a considerable navy with them. When they arrived at Daguku, they saw that the Haihe River had been blocked. They were dissatisfied, blaming China for breach of trust, and sent ships to extract defensive equipment. Seng Jelinkin ordered the forts on both sides of the Taiwan Strait to fire at the same time by surprise. The British and French ships were unable to resist. The Marines were stuck in the deep mud on the beach and could not land. They could only declare defeat and wait for more troops to be sent from home. The winter of the 9th year of Xianfeng and the spring of the 10th year. It was the most urgent time for the civil war between the Qing court and the Taiping rebellion. Suzhou was surrounded by the Taiping army and was in danger. Officials in Jiangsu and Zhejiang and gentry in Shanghai and Suzhou were completely panicked, and they heard that the North was at war with Britain and France. Because they were trying their best to seek assistance from Britain and France to deal with the Taiping army. Therefore, they repeatedly requested Beijing to appease the barbarians, indicating the formidable military strength of outsiders and the dangerous situation in the lower reaches of the Yangtze River. Although the Qing government did not allow them to ask for help from outsiders, they were afraid of showing weakness to others. However, foreign policy did not become tougher because of the victory in Daguku. Beijing was now willing to recognize the Treaty of Tianjin. Regarding the war in Taku, the Qing court's defense was also very reasonable. If the true intention of the representatives of Britain and France was to go to Beijing to exchange treaties, why would they need to bring heavy troops with them? Since the Haihe River is a river controlled by China, China has the right to fortify it, and this defense may be against the Taiping army, not an expression of foreign hostility. Although the Haihe River is blocked, foreign representatives can still disembark at Beitang and enter Beijing by land. Our country's propaganda based on the above theory is quite effective. After the Battle of Taku, Britain and France did not insist on revenge. They only asked for compensation for losses and other insignificant interpretation and modification of the treaty. This kind of request beyond the Tianjin Treaty became the cause of the British and French coalition forces in the Xianfeng decade. 10 years. The British and French troops attacked the Daegu fort from the side. Sengalinkan could not support it, and even Tianjin could not defend it. The Qing court sent Guiliang and others to negotiate in Tianjin. The extra request was granted. But when it came time to sign, a British and French representative asked to lead the guard to Beijing. Secondly, they thought that Guiliang's certificate of full authority was not in the correct format and suspected that his negotiations were just a delaying tactic by China, so they broke off again. British and French troops advanced directly towards Beijing. The Qing court reassigned Prince Yi Ziyuan as the imperial envoy to negotiate in Tongzhou. The conditions were agreed upon again. However, Parkes, the representative of the British envoy, stated before signing that the British envoy must submit his credentials to the Chinese emperor in person after arriving in Beijing. This is the etiquette that should be followed internationally, but at that time the Chinese believed that this was the madness of foreigners and their ulterior motives, which China would never tolerate. Ziyuan ordered the army to arrest the British and French representatives who came to Tongzhou to negotiate. This move angered outsiders, and the military started again. Emperor Xianfeng originally wanted to personally unify the 6th Division and go straight to Tongzhou to attack the sky and attack with Tat. But after the breakup of Tongzhou, he fled Rihe and sent Prince Gong Yi to stay in Beijing. Yi was Xianfeng's biological brother. He was only 28 years old at this time. Of course, he had no new knowledge. During the negotiations in Tianjin in the 8th year, he tried his best to oppose Yangtze River trade. It was he who initially proposed the capture of foreign representatives, so he also belonged to the suppressing barbarians faction. But he is a bloody person. And he sincerely plans for the country. He was a sage in the clan for 100 years after the Qing dynasty. In the Daoxian era, it was understandable that the general scholar bureaucrats were ignorant of the general trend of the world. However, after defeat, they remained arrogant, such as joining Lin Zexu's suppressing barbarians, or surrendering without trying to cheer up or reform. If the Fui faction agrees with the Qiang, it will be hopeless. After Prince Gong took power, the general trend of the world changed. Although he lacked courage, he had Wen Xiang as his assistant. Although Wen Xiang is a relative, his character can be said to be the best representative of Chinese culture, and he is very honest. The most filial piety. He could be the governor, but because his old mother was in the house and he didn't want to travel far, he refused. He is responsible and serious in his work and is not afraid of criticism from others. If we read the Annals of Wen Wenzhong carefully, we feel that he is really a person who worries about the world first and rejoices after the world is happy. Great politician. Yi and Wenxiang accepted their fate when the head of state fled and Kyoto was about to fall. At first, they were hesitant because they had no diplomatic experience. Later, when they saw the situation clearly, they resolutely recognized the demands of outsiders and signed the Treaty of Beijing with Britain and France. After the treaty was signed, Britain and France withdrew their troops, and China did not lose an inch of land. The Treaty of Tianjin in the 6th year of Xianfeng and the Treaty of Beijing in the 10th year were the results of 3 years of war and negotiation. Although there are many terms, the main ones are Beijing's ambassador and Yangtze River trade. The historical significance is that from then on, the relationship between China and the West became even closer. This relationship can be a curse or a blessing, depending on whether we cheer up or not. Yi Shi and Wen Xiang never look back, nostalgic for the seclusion era that is gone and will never return. They moved forward boldly. Find a new way out in international life. What makes those of us who study modern history sad is that this new spirit could not appear after the Opium War but 20 years later during the late Xian dynasty and the early Tang dynasty. Every inch of time is worth every inch of gold. This is true for individuals and even more so for the nation. Chapter 2. Hong Xiuquan and Xinghua Fan. In the first section, the old society followed the cycle dash. The first chapter has discussed the disasters from outside during the Daoguang and Xianfeng years. We said that disaster was inevitable because we could not prevent the Western scientific and mechanical forces from coming to the Far East. We have also said that we can turn disaster into blessing. As long as we boldly accept modern Western culture, with our human and material resources, if we accept scientific machinery and national spirit, we can keep pace with other countries and in international life, achieve a very glorious position. But people in Daoguang's era didn't have this idea. Although the Opium War was defeated, they did not admit that it was a defeat. Neither the suppressing barbarians faction, which advocated war, nor the Fui faction, which advocated peace, tried to revive themselves after the war, just as they did before the war. Until he learned the lesson of his second defeat. Then some people recognized the differences of the times and thought about reform. Before describing the new construction during the Tongji and Guangxu years, we will try to further study China's internal affairs during the Daoxian years. In modern history, although diplomacy is important, domestic affairs are the fundamental factor that determines the strength of a country. For example, before the last World War, Germany's diplomacy failed, so the war also failed. However, because Germany's internal affairs were sound, less than 20 years after the war, she regained her status. This is self-reliance. Unfortunately, in the 19th century, our society, politics, the economy has reached a state of decay. According to estimates by the former Qing government, China's population in the 40th year of Kangxi, 1701, was approximately 20 million. Note, the author is wrong. The 20 million should be people, not population. In the 5th year of Jiaqing, 1,800 years, the number increased to 30 million. There was a 15-fold increase in 100 years. Although this estimate is unreliable, there is no doubt that our country's population increased greatly in the 18th century. The 17th century was a century of massacres. At the beginning, there was civil strife in the late Ming dynasty. Later, there were wars between the Ming and Qing dynasties and planned massacres of Han people by the Manchu and Qing dynasties, such as the Yangzhou 10-day massacre and the Jiating massacre. Let us not forget Zhang Xianzhong's massacre in Sichuan. In recent years, the Academia Sinica has published many historical materials of the Ming and Qing dynasties. One of them is the annual population report of a county governor in Sichuan in the early years of Kangxi. The county master said that after the chaos, the population of his county was only more than 900 people, and within a year, tigers ate more than half of it. The three dynasties of Kangxi, Yongzheng and Qianlong were great periods of great rule after great chaos. So the population increased. This is a trap that has been played out in China for thousands of years. It has been played out over and over again, and even the sages cannot escape. People at that time did not know how to use science to control births on the one hand, and they did not know how to use science to increase production on the other. After the Great Rebellion and at the beginning of the Great Reign, the population decreased. There is wasteland that can be cultivated, so the people live and work in peace and contentment, and their living standards are slightly improved. This is the golden age in the minds of ordinary people. Later, the population increased day by day, and the wasteland decreased day by day. Moreover, the newly cultivated land either had poor soil quality or insufficient water resources, so the area of cultivated land per person decreased. The standard of living is reduced. The common people were confused and had no choice but to burn incense and worship Buddha, lamenting their bad fate. Even if the scholar bureaucrats and the government have the intention to save the world, they have no power to save the world and have no choice but to let natural and man-made disasters evolve naturally. When the bandits come together, the people can no longer produce, and small chaos turns into big chaos. There is another cycle in Chinese history. Most of the founding monarchs and founding fathers of each dynasty came from the common people, had very little self-respect, and had a very low standard of luxury. They were more sympathetic to the suffering of the people, and were more conscientious in their work. This was an era when internal affairs advocated clarification of officials. Later, the desires of the ruling class gradually increased, and the standard of luxury increased accordingly. As a result, the corruption of officials also greatly increased. Moreover, in the old society, politics was the only way out for talented people, unlike in modern cultural society, where people with lofty ideals can engage in industry and commerce in addition to being officials. You can practice medicine, be a journalist, a university professor, a scientist, an inventor, an explorer, musician, an artist, or an engineer, and all of them have both fame and fortune, and their income is often higher than that of a high official. Some people say, China's society in the old days was very equal because all officials came from the imperial examination. Moreover, education in the old days was very cost-effective. This view is too optimistic. Which Hanlon of the former Qing dynasty had worked as a coolie before he succeeded? We can further ask, among the Hanlons of the former Qing dynasty, which one's father had ever worked as a coolie? Lin Zexu. Zheng Guofan was a child of a famous poor family in the former Qing dynasty, but if we look closely at their family background, we know that their father was a teacher, not a laborer. How many of China's old capitalists didn't start out as officials? Which kind of big business in China in the old days did not have the backing of officials and relied on official power to make a fortune? All in all, in the old Chinese society, those who were interested in career were concentrated in the political circles, and those who were dedicated to making money were also crowded in the officialdom. The result is that the number of personnel in each yamen is always increasing. And the number of yamen is also increasing every day. Therefore, in each dynasty, when the world has been at peace for a long time, the population has increased a lot, and people's livelihood is suffering, the number of officials has increased, the corruption of each official has become more severe, and the oppression of the people has become more serious. By the Zheqing period, China had reached the lowest point of the cycle. According to the archives preserved in the Palace Museum, the powerful minister He Shen, who was dismissed in the early years of Jeching, accumulated as much as 90,000 taels of private property. One can imagine the situation in the officialdom at that time. Calendar of the Jeching and Daoguang dynasties. There is rarely a day without civil strife in China. Initially, there was the rebellion of the White Lotus Christians in Hubei, Sichuan, and Shaanxi provinces. Later, there was the rebellion of the Muslims in the northwest and the Miaowei rebellion in the southwest. At the same time, pirates were also rampant along the southeast coast. This is someone who is blatantly confronting the country. As for gangsters lurking in society, they are everywhere. In the 15th year of Daoguang's reign, censor Chang de Chuanshang reported, there are religious bandits in Jili, Shandong, and Hunan. They spread the teachings and deceive the public to collect money. When the year is poor, they gang up during the day to rob, which is called equalizing grain. Recently, they have occasionally taken action. Keep growing roots in Yongzhou, Qinzhou, and Guiyang in Hunan. In Nannan and Ganzhou in Jiangxi, which border Guangdong and Guangxi, there are gangs of gangsters who have committed huge crimes. When the invasion of Western forces started, it was when our resistance was weak. By the Daoguang period, our legal system was in name only, officials were corrupt, and people's livelihood was in great suffering. Morality has partly lost its holding power. On the one hand, we must accept the new culture, and on the other hand, we must try to revitalize the old politics and religion. The difficulties our nation has encountered in modern times are twofold. In the second section, Hong Xiuquan attempted to establish a new dynasty. The Taiping Rebellion led by Hong Xiuquan. It is a product of the era and environment mentioned in the previous section. Hong Xiuquan was a native of Huaxian County, Guangdong. He was born in the 18th year of Jeching, that is, 1813 AD. Legend has it that his father was a farmer and his family was poor, but he attended a village school since he was a child and did not drop out of school until he was 16. Become a rural teacher. It seems that he is not from the lowest level of Chinese society, and he is not a laborer himself. He went to Guangzhou twice to take the scholar examination, but failed both times. So I felt resentful. This is a common thing in old society and is not surprising. Hong Xiuquan's experience was especially when he was taking the exam in Guangzhou and came across propaganda materials from Christian missionaries. Later, he was seriously ill for more than 40 days. During his illness, he dreamed of various hallucinations, claiming that they were consistent with the teachings of Jesus, so he believed in God and founded the Society of God. The earliest comrade was Feng Yunshan. He was also a person who was dissatisfied because of his failure in the exam. Because their missionary work in Guangdong was not going well, they moved their activities to Guiping County, Guangxi. Since ancient times, folk movements in China have had a religious nature, and this was also the case in the Middle Ages in the West. However, Hong Xiuquan's relationship with Christianity was just an accident. His Christianity is also nondescript. He called Jehovah his heavenly Father, Jesus his heavenly brother, and himself his heavenly brother. He came to save the world on the orders of his heavenly Father and brother. His orders are the orders of heavenly Father and heavenly brothers. Those who worship Jehovah God will be free from disaster. Those who do not worship will be hurt by snakes and tigers. If his soldiers die on the battlefield, they will become immortals. Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism are all witchcraft. Confucius temples and temples must be destroyed. Hong Xiuquan's God Society absorbed many members of the Triad Society. This triad is a well-organized secret society that probably started in the late Ming and early Qing dynasties. Hong Xiuquan may have already had the idea of racial revolution. In any case, after he accepted the members of the Triad Society, the first purpose of his movement was to overthrow the Qing dynasty. He called the Manchus monsters. The Manchus' changing of Chinese clothes and promiscuous Chinese women, 3,000 beauties were all defiled by Jie dogs, millions of beauties actually slept with coquettish foxes, are the best targets of Hong Xiuquan's propaganda materials. In addition to promoting religious revolution and racial revolution, Hong Xiuquan. Does he have social revolutionary ideas? He advocated equal rights for men and women, but his palace was full of concubines, and the princes and generals of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom also had many wives and concubines. His edict included the land acreage system, whose basic idea is similar to communism. We have fields to cultivate together, we have food to eat together, and we have clothing to wear together. If you have money, use it together. However, although his land equalization policy had detailed provisions, it was not implemented. Is it because he was unwilling to implement it? Or did he feel that it was difficult to implement and was unwilling to try? Based on all the historical data we have, we can judge. We can say that Hong Xiuquan was very positive towards religious revolution and racial revolution, but very negative towards social revolution. In addition to Feng Yunshan, his party members also included Yang Xiuqing, who burned charcoal, and was later granted the title of King of the East. Xiao Chaogui, who farmed the mountains, was later granted the title of King of the West. Wei Chonghui, who had donated his students to work as subordinate officials in the Yamen, was later named King of the North, and the rich man Shirdacai was later named King of Wings. His movement was of course a folk movement, reflecting the pain and superstition of the people at that time, as well as the racial concepts lurking among the people. The summer of the 30th year of Daoguang. Hong Xiuquan raised troops in Jintian village, Guangxi. In September, he occupied Mengshan County, formerly known as Yong'an, so he named the country the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom and called himself the Heavenly King. Qing soldiers invaded Yong'an. Hong Xiuquan raised troops in Jintian village, Guangxi. In September, he occupied Mengshan County, formerly known as Yong'an, so he named the country the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom and called himself the Heavenly King. Qing soldiers invaded Yong'an. Hong Xiuquan broke out in the spring of the second year of Xianfeng and attacked Guilin, but failed, so he changed his plan to Hunan. He encountered strong resistance in Changsha. Then attacked the lower reaches of the Xiangjiang River. In Yuezhou, he obtained the ordnance left by Wu Sangui and robbed many sailing ships. After his strength was replenished, he went straight to Wuhan. Although he captured Hanyang and Wuchang, he did not leave troops to defend them and established officials to govern them. He has been attacking the lower reaches of the Yangtze River. Along the way, they conquered Zhejiang, Anqing, and Wuhu. In the spring of the third year of Xianfeng's reign, they invaded Nanjing and made it their capital. His name is Tianjing. Before establishing the capital in Nanjing, Hong Xiuquan's actions were similar to those of a rogue bandit. After establishing the capital in Nanjing, he began his work of founding the country. 30 years since Daoguang, 1850. By the third year of Xianfeng, 1853, it can be said to be a successful period for the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. During this period, how did society respond to Hong Xiuquan's movement? Generally speaking, citizens who keep their own laws are neutral, regardless of whether they are rich or poor. When the Taiping army arrived, they obeyed the Taiping army and contributed money. When the officers and soldiers arrived, they obeyed them and contributed money. They are obedient people, but in fact they are in a dilemma. They had absolutely no favorable impression of the Manchu government and its officials, because they had suffered enough. Moreover, the discipline of the officers and soldiers was not good during this period. The discipline of the Taiping army was relatively good. At the same time, the common people feel that the Taiping army is a rebel, making it impossible for them to continue to live their peaceful life. The Taiping army destroyed temples and idols everywhere, which the superstitious people couldn't stand and disapproved of. Bandits from all over the country took advantage of the situation and robbed them. Wherever the Taiping army passed, it was easy for them to move. They went about their business without showing any favoritism to the government troops and the Taiping army. Organized secret societies aligned themselves with the Taiping army, such as the Gulao Hui in Hunan and the Shao Dao Hui in Shanghai. Most of the scholar official class actively opposed Hong Xiuquan's religious revolution. As for filling one floor, the scholar bureaucrats were not ignorant of the shame of the Han people, but because although Hong Xiuquan was a Han Chinese and although he advocated racial revolution, they tried their best to destroy thousands of years of Han culture. Although the Manchus are foreigners, they have supported Han culture from the beginning. Secondly, they feel that the distinction between monarch and ministers has been established, and they should not cause chaos casually. Chaos is easy, but it is extremely difficult to correct chaos. Therefore, the scholar bureaucrat class at this time did not have any regard for racial revolution. Not enthusiastic. Why was the Taiping army's military operation so successful during this period? The main reason is not the merits of the Taiping army itself. In terms of organization and training, the Taiping army is very ordinary. In terms of weapons, the Taiping army is not as good as the official army. In terms of general talent, the Taiping army has never produced a general. The reason why the Taiping army was able to win during this period was entirely because it was an emerging force, full of vigor, able to fight hard and make sacrifices. Not only were the officers and soldiers very depressed, they were simply corrupted into an army. There were two types of officers and soldiers at that time, namely the 8 Banners and the Green Camp. The fighting power of the 8 Banners followed the Chineseization of the Manchus. Culture weakened and lost. Therefore, during the Qianlong and Zheqing years, the Qing dynasty gradually used more green camps and fewer 8 Banners. By the time of Daoguang and Xianfeng, the green camp had become the main force of the Qing court, and its degree of corruption was equal to that of the general political circles. Soldiers' pay was very low and they were exploited by officials, so they made a living by themselves and regarded being a soldier as a side job. Without discipline and drill, it will only harm the people, and war will be almost out of the question. Moreover, there was deep suspicion among the generals and they would never cooperate with each other. But Green Camp also has a benefit in terms of system. Although this kind of army is extremely corrupt, it is the army of a unified country, not an individual's private force. Before Dao and Xian dynasties, no local official dared to support his troops and stand up to the imperial court. Private force. It was an unexpected byproduct of the Taiping Civil War, and we should pay close attention to its emergence in the future. In the third section, Zhenguofan refreshed the old society. Zhenguofan is a representative figure of our country's old culture, even an ideal figure. He was born in the 16th year of Zheching, 1811. 2 years older than Hong Xiuquan. He is from Xiangxiang, Hunan, and his family has a farming background. Although he has never done any hard work, his education was gained through hardships. When he became Hanlin, it was when the Opium War was about to begin. Although his diary mentioned the Opium War, he seemed to pay little attention and did not understand the historical significance of that war. He is still buried in ancient books. He is a practical Neo-Confucianist. Whether we read his words, read his articles, or study his conduct as a person, we naturally think of the small farmer in our country who works hard. Like the small farmer, he never does anything casually throughout his life. He knows that literary achievements, knowledge and moral achievements can only be obtained with sweat and blood. Just as small farmers know that they have to sweat to get grains of rice and wheat. In the early years of Xianfeng, Zhenguofan became a minister, which is equivalent to the current deputy ministers of various ministries. Although his confidants admit that the ethics of his articles are outstanding, he does not have many confidants. Moreover, a few close friends do not know that he has great political talents. I am afraid that even he himself does not know. So at the beginning of his career, his reputation was not high, and he had no political power to back him up. However, the local scholar-bureaucrat class in Hunan confirmed his leadership status. His attitude towards Hong Xiuquan was that of ordinary scholar-bureaucrats at that time, but he was more positive than others. Not only were the officers and soldiers at that time unable to fight, they were also unable to deal with bandits in the countryside. Therefore, people organize group training for self-defense. This kind of group training is the force of the people, and it is used by farmers who are doing their jobs to resist the homeless bandits who are not doing their jobs. This kind of force is because it is not officialized and because it has a vital interest in the peasants. Preserve the inherent bravery and honesty of our country's villagers. Zhenguofan's career was to utilize this kind of rural bravery, organize and train it, and turn it into an army. This was the later famous Hunan Army. Team training was common across the country at that time and was not an original creation of Zhenguofan. But why is it that only the Hunan Army can achieve great things? The reason lies in the little organization and training Zhenguofan added. Zhenguofan's first priority in managing the army was especially the emphasis on spiritual education. He himself firmly believes that the legacy of Confucius and Mencius is the most precious treasure of our nation. Since Hong Xiuquan wants to abolish Confucius, then Hong Xiuquan is his enemy, that is, the enemy of the entire nation. The most intense point in his criticism against thieves, against Hong Xiuquan is this. If all the thousands of years of etiquette, justice, human relations, poetry, and books in China are wiped out, this will not be the only change that occurred in the Qing dynasty. However, since the founding of the world, the famous religion has undergone extraordinary changes. Confucius and Mencius, have cried bitterly in Zhochuan. How can anyone who is educated and literate sit back and watch without thinking about what he has done? He was a loyal believer in Confucius and Mencius, and the officers and assistants he chose were all his loyal comrades. He was the commander-in-chief of the army. He is also a mentor to soldiers. Therefore, the Hunan army is an army with principles. In fact, spiritual education is the foundation of Zheng Guofan's lifelong career, and it is also the special position of his in our country's modern history. His administration and employment are all about first-class principles. He felt that political reform must precede spiritual reform. The officials in the late Qing dynasty who came from Zheng Wen's main sect were all relatively decent, which shows his great influence. Zheng Guofan not only used China's old ethics as the spiritual foundation for his army, and used clan concepts and local concepts to strengthen the unity of the army. Almost all the officials and assistants he selected were from Hunan, and most of them were from Shangxiang. These officers and assistants all went back to their hometowns to recruit soldiers, so the soldiers were all from the same clan or region. In this way, the spirit of mutual help among his subordinates is particularly strong. This is the second characteristic of the Hunan army. Historically, spiritual leaders were rarely also career leaders, because those who focus on spirituality tend to ignore the specific conditions of their careers. In Western society, these two leadership qualifications are completely separate. Disciplinaries don't have to take care of things, and people who take care of things don't have to discipline. This is not the case in China. Chinese society has not distinguished between politics and religion for thousands of years, and the government and teachers are one. Therefore, in China, top leaders must have dual qualifications. Although Zheng Guofan paid attention to being a human being, don't neglect your work. This is his special third point. There were many reasons why the Green Camp could not fight at that time, one of which was that the treatment was too poor. When Zheng started to organize group training, she decided to pay Lu Yong 4 taels and Shui Yong 3 taels and 6 per month. Double the salary of Green Camp. The Hunan army enjoys special rights in terms of treatment. The Hunan army's operational area is the provinces along the Yangtze River. In this area, the advantage on the water can very well determine the advantage on land. Therefore, Zheng Guofan paid attention to the navy from the beginning. About weapons. Although Zheng often said that war depends on people rather than weapons, he was very painstaking in the manufacture of weapons, especially cannons. He tried his best to recruit the technical talents of the time. He is also very serious about the training of soldiers. He himself often went to inspect and inspect. He does not indulge his officers, nor does he want them to indulge his subordinates. Zheng Guofan's career, like his knowledge, was also fought out of hardships. He wants to save the old society and culture, but the bureaucrats produced by that old society and old culture want to make trouble for him. He wanted to maintain the Qing dynasty, but the Qing dynasty was jealous of him and rejected him. When he was practicing bravery in Changsha, the old officers and soldiers hated his new methods and standards and almost beat him to death. He fled to Hangzhou to avoid the chaos. His first battle was a failure, and he committed suicide by drowning. Fortunately, he was rescued by his subordinates. He trained his troops to fight and at the same time raised his own wages. He became a big deal in the future, not because the Qing government and bureaucracy automatically handed over power to him, but because their failure forced them to ask Zheng Guofan to come out to serve, and forced them to give him an opportunity and right to do something. Section 4. Hong Xiuquan failed. After Hong Xiuquan captured Nanjing, we can see that his true intention was not to build a new country or society, but to build a new dynasty. He lived deep in the palace, seeking to enjoy the blessings of being an emperor, and did not care about political affairs. The architecture of the palace and the selection of palace ladies. The accumulation of gold and silver, and the regulations of the official and palace systems, these are the things that the Taiping king paid most attention to. His religion turned into crazy superstition. Yang Shuqing reported to him the difficulties in state affairs, and he replied, "I follow the holy will of God, the holy will of Brother Jesus. Why should you be afraid of descending to earth to be the only God of all nations in the world? I don't need you to report, and I don't need you to deal with political affairs. I want to go out, and I want to live in the capital. Because of you, I have an iron bucket for the country. If you don't support me, someone will help you. You said I have no soldiers. My heavenly soldiers are more than water. Why fear Zheng Yao, Guofan?" When it was about to be destroyed, Nanjing ran out of food. Hong Xiuquan ordered the people to drink dew to satisfy their hunger, saying that dew was the food of heaven. Such leaders not only fail to revive the nation, but also fail to serve as a center of unity for their subordinates. In the 6th year of Xianfeng's reign, there was great internal strife between Hong Xiuquan's left and right. Yang Shuqing, the king of the east, was in sole power. All other kings must be controlled by the eastern king. According to the ceremony of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, the heavenly king is called Long Live, the eastern king is called 9,000 years old, the western king is called 8,000 years old, and the remainder decreases in descending order. All other kings must go to the East Prince's mansion to ask for peace and discuss matters, and they must kneel down and call them 1,000 years old. When the King of Heaven was being recited, the King of the East stood before His Majesty, while the others knelt before His Majesty. Therefore, Yang Shuqing was resented by his peers. At the same time, the King of Heaven is also afraid that he will replace him. In September of the 6th year of his reign, Northern King Wei Chonghui designed to trap and kill Yang Shuqing and his relatives and gang members. King Yi Shide was unhappy, and King Bei killed King Yi's family again. The King of Heaven wanted to contact the King of Wings. He ordered the King of the North to be killed, but the King of Yi continued to stand alone in the future and broke away from the King of Heaven. After this internal strife, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom's hope of overthrowing the Qing dynasty was completely eliminated. Hong Xiuquan was still able to resist for 8 years, partly because there were large groups of ninja bandits in the north to support him. The second reason is that he gained 2 good generals who were rising up, the loyal King Li Xiucheng and the British King Chen Yucheng. As for the Qing dynasty, they waited until others had failed and then reused Zheng Guofan as governor of Liangjiang to control the military affairs of the 4 provinces of Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Anhui, and Jiangxi. Hubei governor Hu Lini was like-minded with him. Do your best to work with him. His brother Zheng Guoquan was a frontline commander who fought hard. Later, Zheng Guofan recommended his disciple Li Hongzhang as governor of Jiangsu, and his friend Zhua Zongtang as governor of Zhejiang. The middle reaches and lower reaches of the Yangtze River were his sphere of influence, so he had to plan everything. He adopted a strategy of encirclement against Hong Xiuquan. At the same time, Britain, the United States, and France also gave Zheng, Zhua, and Li a lot of help. In the 3rd year of Tongzhi, 1864, the Hunan army, led by Zheng Guoquan, invaded Nanjing. Hong Xiuquan committed suicide, and the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom fell. Hong Xiuquan wanted to overthrow the Qing dynasty. Restoring the freedom of the Han people is certainly something we should admire. He wanted to equalize land rights. Although he did not implement it, it still showed that he had considerable political vision. His movement undoubtedly originated from the people, and even his religion catered to the people's psychology. But his shortcomings in personality and talent are many and huge. If he succeeds, he will not be able to bring happiness to our nation. All in all, the failure of the Taiping Rebellion proved that our country's old-style folk movements were unable to save the country and the nation. Can the scholar official movement led by Zheng Guofan save the country and the nation? He saved the Qing dynasty, there is no doubt about it. But the Qing dynasty could not save China if he objectively and honestly studied the Qing dynasty's governance in the Jiaqing, Daoguang, and Xianfeng dynasties. He should have known it was irredeemable. He did not know the truth, so after he pacified the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, his attitude became negative. To be fair, it is natural and forgivable that Zheng Guofan wanted to save the Qing dynasty. First, China's old ethics is his stance. Moreover, the scholar-bureaucrat class is his support, and he cannot be disloyal to the emperor. Second, he thought that the Qing government would be quite enlightened after going through great tribulations. In fact, in the early years of Tongji, Beijing seemed to have a completely new scene and was quite promising because Prince Gong and Wenxiang were in charge. So Jia, Dao. Although the Xian dynasty was a troubled era, the Qing dynasty during the Tongji period did show signs of revival. Third, he was afraid that the demise of the Qing dynasty would cause long-term civil strife. He is well aware of Chinese history. For thousands of years, every time our country changed dynasties, it always went through long-term separatism and civil strife. Then the world will be unified and peaceful. In an era of seclusion and no interference from outsiders, although the Civil War caused endless suffering to the people, it would not lead to the destruction of the country. In the 19th century, surrounded by imperialists, a long-term civil war could lead to the destruction of the country, so Zheng Guofan wanted to maintain the Qing dynasty. This is the biggest reason. Under the premise of maintaining the Qing dynasty as the political center, Zheng Guofan's work was carried out in two aspects. On the one hand, he wants to innovate, that is to say, he wants to accept part of Western culture. On the other hand, he wants to be conservative, that is to say, restore the inherent virtues of our country. Innovation and conservatism were carried out at the same time. This was Zheng Guofan's great contribution to my country's modern history. We still admire Zheng Wenshengong because he has such a great vision. It is in vain to restore our country's old ethics without accepting Western culture. We have not yet been able to overcome our nation's great difficulty, because we must not use propriety, justice, and integrity to resist the imperialists' mechanical weapons and machinery. What's more, the old ethics itself has its own imperfections and should not be fully restored, nor can it be fully restored. At the same time, if we accept Western culture in vain without restoring our country's inherent virtues, we will not be able to save the country and the nation, because the corrupt old society and the old bureaucracy cannot carry out undertakings at all, no matter whether the undertaking is new or old. Zheng Guofan's revolutionary cause. We will discuss this in the next chapter. We have already talked about his conservative career in the previous section. Now we point out the shortcomings of his conservative enterprise. When the Hunan army first emerged, it had good mental discipline and high combat effectiveness. Later, when the number of people increased and the cause became great, the Hunan army degenerated. After the recapture of Nanjing, Xing himself admitted that the Hunan army was very angry, so he dismissed many of them. This proves that there is something fundamentally wrong with our country's old way of running the military. In addition, the Hunan army is full of clan and hometown concepts. The soldiers only know that they have direct superiors and do not know that they have a supreme commander. I didn't even know there was a country. One time, Xing Guoquan returned to his hometown to recruit troops and handed over the original troops to Xing Guofan for temporary management. These troops are unruly. Guofan had no choice but to urge Guoquan to return to camp quickly. Therefore, the Hunan army is the beginning of a private army. The spirit of the Hunan army was later passed on to the Huai army under Li Hongzhang, and the Huai army was later passed on to Yuan Shikai's Beiyang army. We know that since the Republic of China, Beiyang warlords have used private armies to divide the country and hinder reunification. Investigating the root cause, we cannot but blame the Hunan army. The shortcomings of the old method can also be seen here. Chapter 3: Self-Improvement and its Failure. Section 1: Cooperate internally and externally for self-improvement. Prince Gong and Wen Xiang learned 3 lessons from the experience of the British and French coalition forces. First, their precise understanding of Western weapons and military training methods is far superior to ours. In the 10th year of Xianfeng's reign, Xing Jilinkin and Xing Bao served as defenders of Beijing and Tianjin. These 2 men were famous generals at the time. After their disastrous defeat, people had no choice but to admit the superiority of the Western army. Second, Prince Gong and Wen Xiang discovered that the Westerners were not only willing to sell weapons to us, but were also willing to teach us the secrets of making weapons and how to train the army. This was quite unexpected. They see this as our opportunity to strengthen ourselves. Third, Prince Gong and Wen Xiang discovered that Westerners were not as ambitious and dishonest as they had imagined. Although the British and French troops occupied Beijing and had sufficient strength to do whatever they wanted, after the Treaty of Beijing was concluded, the British and French actually withdrew their troops in accordance with the treaty. Return the capital. People at the time thought this was a great thing, and it proved that Westerners also kept their faith, so it was not impossible to deal with outsiders. From these 3 lessons, Prince Gong and Wen Xiang set a new policy. First, they decided to use barbarian weapons and barbarian methods to deal with the barbarians. In other words, they felt that China should accept the military part of Western culture. So they bought foreign weapons and hired foreign instructors. They say this is China's way to strengthen itself. Second, they know that self-improvement cannot be established in the short term. Before its self-strength reaches the expected level, China should abide by its treaties to avoid war. Prince Gong and Wen Xiang were both bloody people who were very determined to implement their new policies. When the country was in crisis, they dared to come out to deal with outsiders. And relying solely on the use of diplomacy, they actually regained the capital. People at the time thought this was their miraculous achievement. Moreover, Prince Gong was Xianfeng's biological brother and Tongji's biological uncle. Their status is the most noble in the whole dynasty, and with their determination and qualifications, they became the center of the self-improvement movement in Beijing. At the same time, Xing Guofan, Zhuo Zongtang, Hu Lini, and Li Hongzhang outside Beijing also learned the same lesson. What initially attracted their attention was the ships used by outsiders to smuggle arms and food in the lower reaches of the Yangtze River and sell them to the Taiping army. It is said that Hu Lini had such an experience in Anqing. Riding to the riverside, he suddenly saw two foreign ships with drums heading west, as fast as a galloping horse and as fast as the wind. Wenzhong, namely Hu, changed his face and became silent. He reined up his horse and returned to camp. He vomited blood on the way and almost fell off his horse. Yan Danchu wrote to Shangshang. In the Wenzhong shogunate, he always discussed Western affairs with Wenzhong. Wen Zongzhou waved his hands, closed his eyes, and looked unhappy for a long time, saying, "This is beyond our knowledge." It can be seen that the ship had a deep impression on Hu Wenzhong, and Zheng, Zhua, and Li were roughly the same. I once found some old scholars, blacksmiths and carpenters who knew mathematics and physics in Anqing to try to build a ship, which caused me to be unable to move in the future. Zhua conducted the same experiment in Hangzhou and obtained the same results, which fully proves that such people attach great importance to Western machinery. When fighting in the lower reaches of the Yangtze River, the Taiping Army and the Hunan Army and the Huai Army both bid for foreign guns. Li Hongzhang set up his base in Shanghai and had the most contacts with outsiders. He also has a deep understanding of Western culture, and his subordinates also have a victorious army led by British officer Gordon. Less than a year after he arrived in Shanghai, he wrote to Xinguofan. Hongzhang tasted the warships of the British and French admirals and saw the purity of their cannons and the exquisiteness of their medicines. The distinctiveness of the equipment and the majesty of the team are beyond the reach of China. I am deeply ashamed that Chinese weapons are far inferior to those of foreign countries. I have ordered my soldiers to humbly endure humiliation and learn one or two secret techniques from the Westerners, and I hope they will make a difference. If I stay in Shanghai for a long time and fail to learn from the foreigners' skills, I will regret a lot. Tongji 3 years, 1864. He also wrote to Prince Gong and Wen Xiang. Hongzhang secretly believed that when the world is poor, it will change, and if it changes, it will be prosperous. The Chinese scholar bureaucrats were immersed in the habit of writing in small regular script, and the warriors were so crude that they did not pay attention to it, so they used it beyond what they had learned, and what they learned was not used. If there is nothing wrong, they will denounce foreign weapons as fancy tricks. If you think you don't need to learn, then something will surprise you and the foreign weapon will become strange and magical, so you think you can't learn. I don't know that foreigners have regarded firearms as a matter of body, mind and life for hundreds of years. Once you suddenly understand it and combine yin and yang to coordinate creation, you will be able to command as you wish and follow your heart's desires. The former countries of Britain and France. Treating Japan as a foreign government, they wantonly punish others. The Japanese monarchs and ministers were determined to be powerful, and they selected talented people from the clan and ministers' children to go to Western countries' tool-making factories to learn various skills. They also purchased the tools for making tools and made them in their own countries. Now he can drive ships and build bombs. Last year, the British made false threats and came to attack with troops. However, those who the British relied on for the advantage of the attack and war were already good at their own specialties, and they used them to stand still, while the British were nothing like them. Today's Japan is like the Japanese pirates of the Ming Dynasty. It is far away from the Western countries but close to China. If I am able to stand on my own, I will keep my beauty attached to me and observe the shortcomings and strengths of Westerners. I have no way to strengthen myself. Then you can imitate others and share the benefits of the Westerners. Japan is only a small overseas country, but it can still change its course in time and know what to do. However, because our country is extremely connected in its deep dimensions, I can also change my plans suddenly. Duji once said, "If the benefits are not enough, the law will not change. If the merit is not 10, it is difficult to change the tool." Su Zizhan said that when there is nothing, it is enough to gain fame, but it always suffers from disbelief. When there is something, it is enough to gain faith, but it suffers from lack of belief. Hongzhang believes that if China wants to strengthen itself, it is better to learn foreign weapons. If you want to learn foreign sharp weapons, there is no better way than to find the tools to make them. Learn their methods without having to use all their people. If you want to find tools and people to make utensils, I will set up a special subject to recruit scholars. The scholars will be regarded as the swans of wealth and fame throughout their lives, so that their careers can be completed, their careers can be refined, and their talents can also be gathered. This letter was written by China's greatest statesman in the 19th century. An article of most historical value. We should recite it again and again. Li Hongzhang was the first to believe that in the 19th century, my country could only survive by learning Western scientific machinery. Second, during his 3 years in Tongji, Li Hongzhang had clearly seen which one was stronger between China and Japan. It depends on which country changes quickly. He immediately saw the world historical significance of Japan's Meiji Restoration, and loudly urged people at that time to wake up and work hard. This is especially enough to show the greatness of Li Hongzhang. Third, Li Hongzhang believed that reform should start from cultivating talents, so he wanted to reform the imperial examination system of the former Qing dynasty. Not only that, he simply wanted to reform the scholar officials' outlook on life. He wanted the scholar bureaucrats to give up the old habit of writing in small regular script, and regard science and engineering as a lifelong pursuit of wealth. Because Li Hongzhang understood the times clearly, he became a central figure in the self-improvement movement during the Tongji and Guangxu years. In our society, it is extremely difficult to get things done. Although the self-improvement movement started during the Tongji period did not achieve its goal, it was able to achieve considerable results. A lot of effort has been spent. If there had not been Prince Gong and Wen Xiang presiding in Beijing at that time, and if Zheng Guofan, Li Hongzhang, and Zhuo Zongtang had not promoted it outside Beijing, then China after the British-French Allied forces and the Taiping Rebellion would still be indifferent, just like China after the Opium War. Therefore, we must carefully study what these leaders of the times have done. The second quarter, moving forward step by step. There are many causes for self-improvement. I will select the most important ones and list them below. In the 11th year of Xianfeng's reign, Prince Gong and Wen Xiang hired foreign officers to train the new army in Tianjin. In the same year, Prince Gong and Wen Xiang established Tunguenguan in Beijing. It is the beginning of new learning in China. In the same year, Prince Gong and Wen Xiang asked Robert Hart, the Commissioner of Taxation, to purchase gunboats and hire British naval personnel to come to China to create a new navy. In the second year of Tongji, Li Hongzhang established a foreign language school in Shanghai. In the fourth year of Tongji, Zheng Guofan and Li Hongzhang established Jiangnan Machinery Manufacturing Bureau in Shanghai, with a translation and bookstore attached. In the 5th year of Tongji, Zhuo Zongtang set up a shipyard in Fuzhou with a shipping school attached. In the 9th year of Tongji, Li Hongzhang established the Machinery Manufacturing Bureau in Tianjin. In the 11th year of Tongji, Zheng Guofan and Li Hongzhang selected students to study in the United States. In the same year, Li Hongzhang established the Steamship Investment Promotion Bureau. In the 1st year of Guangxu, Li Hongzhang prepared an armored warship. In the 2nd year of Guangxu's reign, Li Hongzhang sent junior officers to Germany to study the army, and shipping students to England and France to learn shipbuilding and sailing. In the 6th year of Guangxu's reign, Li Hongzhang set up a naval academy in Tianjin, set up a telegraph office, and requested railway construction. In the 7th year of Guangxu's reign, Li Hongzhang established the Kaiping Mining Bureau. In the 8th year of Guangxu's reign, Li Hongzhang built the Lushuan military port and founded the Shanghai Machinery Cloth-making factory. In the 11th year of Guangxu's reign, Li Hongzhang established the Tianjin Military Academy. In the 13th year of Guangxu's reign, Li Hongzhang opened the Mo gold mine in Heilongjiang. In the 14th year of Guangxu's reign, Li Hongzhang established the Beiyang Navy. The motivation for the above comprehensive construction undertakings is national defense, so military construction is the largest. But if we study carefully, we will know that the modernization of national defense involves many things. A modern army first needs modern weapons, so 2 machinery manufacturing plants were established in Jiangnan and Tianjin. Most of those 2 factories are actually arsenals. Second, new weapons must have technical personnel to drive them, so an armament school was established. And sending military officers to study abroad. Third, a modern army must have modern transportation, so shipyards and telegraph offices were established, as well as railways were built. Fourth, the cost of new-style national defense is several times higher than that of old-style defense. It is absolutely impossible to finance modern national defense with medieval production. Therefore, Li Hongzhang wanted to set up an investment bureau to operate transportation along the rivers and coasts, establish a cloth-making factory to regain his rights, and open coal and gold mines to increase income. The leaders of the self-reliance movement did not plan a construction plan in advance in anticipation of various needs. At first they only knew the need to modernize national defense. But after they took one step forward on this road, they found that they had to take another step, and after another step. We must go further. In fact, it must go to the end before it can take effect. Modern national defense not only requires modern transportation, education, and economy, but also modern politics and people. Half new and half old are of no use. In other words, in modern times, if our country wants to survive, it must fully accept Western culture. Although Zheng Guofan and others took several steps toward modernization, they were not thorough and could not save the country and the nation. In the 3rd quarter, progress encountered obstacles. Although Zheng Guofan and other leaders of the self-improvement movement followed a good line, they could not save the country and the nation. What's the reason for this? It lies in their incompleteness. Why aren't they thorough? Partly because they don't want to be thorough themselves. Mostly because the times do not allow them to be thorough. Let us first examine the shortcomings of leaders. The 5 great leaders, Prince Gong Yisan, Wen Xiang, Zheng Guofan, Li Hongzhang, and Zhuo Zongtang, were all born in the old society and received the old education. None of them can read foreign books. Except for Li Hongzhang, no one has been to foreign countries. Li Hongzhang's overseas mission was still after his defeat in the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1894, and his construction career had already passed. It is remarkable that such people can resolutely pursue new causes. It is natural that they cannot fully understand Western culture. Very forgivable. They admire Western machinery very much and work very hard to accept it. They also respect Western science and know that science is the basis of machinery. But they themselves have no common sense about science and mechanics, let alone anything else. They feel that China's political system and founding spirit are perfect and there is no need to learn from the West. In fact, their construction career was hindered by the old system and the old spirit. We can take Li Hongzhang's career as an example. Li Hongzhang died in the 9th year of Tongji. 1870, began to serve as governor of Zhili and minister of Beiyang. Because among the important people at that time, he was the most able to deal with outsiders, and because he was more courageous in taking charge, and his White Army was the most powerful army in the country in recent times. Therefore, Li Hongzhang was the central figure of that era during the Sino-Japanese War from the 9th year of Tongji to the 20th year of Guangxu. The construction of national defense is all in his hands. He paid special attention to the Navy because he saw clearly that if China could defeat the Japanese Navy, no matter how strong the Japanese army was, we cannot attack Goryeo, let alone harm China. Then, Li Hongzhang's first difficulty in running a navy was funding. Funding was difficult because China's financial system at that time, like the general political system, was medieval. The central government does not have funds for the navy. We have to rely on cooperation from various provinces. The provinces are deeply prejudiced and unwilling to cooperate. When the central government asked the provinces for assistance, each province sought the least amount. After it was approved, it could not fully allocate funds on time, so it always had to be postponed and discounted. Secondly, at that time, the royal family used money without any restrictions, and no distinction was made between public and private matters. After Tongji died, there was no heir. So the Queen Mother of the West chose a child as emperor, named Guangxu, but the real power was not in the hands of the Queen Mother of the West. When Guangxu was about to come of age and take charge, Guangxu and his father, Prince Chun, were unwilling to hand over the power to the Queen Mother. Prince Chun decided to rebuild the Summer Palace, on the one hand to show Guangxu's filial piety to the Queen Mother of the West, and on the other hand to make the Queen Mother of the West indulge in pleasure and stop being involved in politics. The cost of rebuilding the Summer Palace was huge and it was impossible to prepare, so Prince Chun asked Li Hongzhang for help. Mrs. Li did not dare to offend Prince Chun. Not even daring to offend the Queen Mother of the West, she had no choice but to divert the funds for navy construction to rebuild the Summer Palace. Therefore, in the 7 years before the Sino-Japanese War, the Chinese Navy did not order a single new ship. Under the modern political system, this kind of thing cannot happen. There is no new civil service system and auditing system in the agency presided over by Li Hongzhang. Even under an extremely honest and rigorous leader, without a good system, corruption cannot be eradicated, not to mention that Mr. Li himself is not honest. The more money people handle in the Navy, the greater their chances of making a fortune. By the time of the Sino-Japanese War, although the cannons on our ships were larger than those of Japan, they did not have enough shells, and the bullets were not filled with gunpowder. Foreign businessmen and officials colluded and made private fortunes. The affairs of the country were ruined. Li Hongzhang's own naive scientific knowledge was also one of the reasons for the failure of his career. When the Beiyang Navy was first established, he invited experienced officers from the British Navy to serve as chief instructors and deputy commanders. Around the 10th year of Guangxu's reign, China's navy had very strict discipline. The drills were very diligent and technology progressed rapidly. At that time, China's navy was very promising. Later, Li Hongzhang misunderstood others and dismissed the officers of the British Navy and hired officers of the German Army Cavalry as chief instructors of the Navy. From then on, the technology of our Navy deteriorated. Moreover, the commander-in-chief of the Navy used by Li Hongzhang was Ding Ruchang, who knew nothing about the Navy. Ding was originally a cavalry leader in the Huai Army. Of course, as the leader of the Navy, he can only make mistakes but not achieve anything. During the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1894, the Chinese Navy ranked 8th in the world. Japan's Navy ranks 11th. Our failure was not because the ships were inferior to the people, the cannons were inferior to the people, or the strategies and tactics were inferior to the people. This is the case with the Beiyang Navy, and it is the same with other self-improvement undertakings. In short, the self-improvement movement during the Tongji and Guangxu years could not save the country. It's not because the line is wrong, it's because the leaders are not new enough, so they cannot be thorough. But if the leaders at that time were newer and wanted to further accept Western culture, would society allow them? Society must give them greater obstacles. The kind of incomplete reforms they carried out have already been opposed by ordinary people. If they go further, the opposition will be even greater. Take the railway for example. In the 6th year of Guangxu, 1880, Li Hongzhang and Lu Mingchuan petitioned for construction. By the 20th year of Guangxu's reign, only a small section near Tianjin was built. Why? Because most people believe that building railways will destroy feng shui. Another example is science. In the 5th year of Tongji, 1866, Prince Gong established an additional science class in Tongguan Hall, invited foreign scientists as professors, and recruited people from the Hanlin Academy as students. His reasons are very good. He said that buying foreign ships and guns was only a temporary expedient, and the fundamental solution was to make them ourselves. But if you want to make it yourself, you must have a scientific talent. So he wanted to invite foreigners to teach science to young Chinese students. He added, "Husband, the world's shame is nothing to be ashamed of but being inferior to others." Japan, a small country, still knows how to be ambitious and powerful. China alone is obsessed with following old habits and does not want to cheer up. How shameful is it? Now, instead of being ashamed to be inferior to others, and only to be ashamed of learning from others, you will settle for being inferior to others and never learn from them. How can you avenge your shame? Although what he said was justified, there were still people who objected. At that time, there was a well-known and respected scholar in Beijing, Ren, who objected loudly. "I have heard that the way to build a country is to respect etiquette and righteousness rather than power and strategy. The fundamental purpose lies in the human heart, not in skills." At that time, there was a well-known and respected scholar in Beijing, Ren, who objected loudly. "I have heard that the way to build a country is to respect etiquette and righteousness rather than power and strategy. The fundamental purpose lies in the human heart, not in skills." Now, if you are at the end of your art and you take a barbarian as your teacher, no matter how cunning the barbarians are, you may not be able to pass on their exquisite skills. Even if the teacher teaches sincerely, what he can achieve is nothing more than a person who is a magician. From ancient times to the present, I have never heard of anyone being able to weaken or invigorate a weak person by relying on magic numbers. The world is so big that there is no need for lack of talent. If astronomy and arithmetic must be taught, and those who learn from others must be masters of their skills, why bother to barbarize others? Why should we learn from the foreigners? Prince Gong was extremely angry. He replied, "Since the great scholar saw this as a hindrance, he must have had other good intentions. If there is a clever plan that can control foreign countries without being controlled by foreign countries, I should follow the great scholars and use all my ignorance to discuss it carefully. If there is no other good strategy, just use words such as loyalty and trustworthiness as armor, etiquette and justice as oars. It is said that it can break the Chong Zunzu, which is enough to defeat the enemy, but I really don't dare to believe it." Warren was just a conservative fool, but the scholar bureaucrats at the time actually listened to him and refused to take the exam for the science class at Tungwan Hall. How did society oppose newcomers and new policies during the Tongji and Guangxu years? We can see more clearly from Guo Songtao's fate. Guo's education and background were the same as those of ordinary scholar bureaucrats at that time. However, during the Anglo-French Allied Forces campaign in the late Xianfeng dynasty, he followed Xing Jilinkin to negotiate at the mouth of Daegu. After that experience, he finally became enlightened. We know that China must undergo radical reform. His consciousness is deeper than that of Prince Gong and others. According to his research, during the heyday of the Han and Tang dynasties, we often interacted with foreigners on an equal footing. We had a philosophy of being insular and arrogant. It was advocated by the Neo-Confucian scholars during the period when the power of the southern Song dynasty was weak, and it is by no means sufficient as a lesson. In the early years of Tongji, a group of scholar bureaucrats in Nanchang, Jiangxi province destroyed churches and killed missionaries. Governor Shen Baozhen, Lin Zexu's son-in-law, praised the scholar bureaucrats for their righteousness, while Guo Songtao rebuked Shen for his stubbornness. When Guo was the governor of Guangdong, the people of Shantao, like the people of Guangzhou before, did not allow foreigners to enter the city. He desperately forced Shantao people to abide by the treaty and allowed foreigners to enter the city. In the first year of Guangxu's reign, Qin Yueying, the governor of Yunnan and Guizhou, opposed the British's entry into Yunnan. Secretly killed the translator of the British embassy on the Yunnan-Myanmar border. Guo Songtao immediately impeached Qin Yueying. The next year, the government sent him as an envoy to Britain and France, and China had ministers stationed abroad starting from him. When he was in Western Europe, he worked hard to study Western politics, economy, and society. He feels that not only Western ships and guns are worth learning, but also Western political systems and general culture are worth learning. He published his diary and gave it to his friends. He often wrote to Li Hongzhang, reporting that the students Japan sent to the West were not limited to mechanics. There are those who study politics and economics. He advised Li Hongzhang to expand the scope of studying abroad. His comments that were beyond the times aroused abuse from scholar officials across the country. They said that Guo Songtao was a traitor and had second thoughts towards Britain. Big scholars in Hunan, such as Wang Kaiyun and others, wrote a couplet to criticize him. It is beyond its kind and outstanding, and it cannot be tolerated in the era of Yao and Shun. If you can't serve people, how can you serve ghosts? Why go to the country of your parents? Wang Kaiyin's diary also said, "It is a shame for Hunan people to be associated with each other." Guo Songtao returned to China after 2 years as an envoy. "When I returned home, there was no problem. He is the most enlightened person in the country, and his knowledge of the West is far superior to that of Li Hongzhang." However, people at that time opposed him, and he had no chance to do anything in the future, so he had to live in seclusion in Hunan and work on his writings. His collected works of Yangji bookstore is still worth reading. The person who succeeded Guo Songtao as minister to Britain and France was Zheng Jiza. He has been abroad for more than 5 years and has some knowledge of English. His talent and vision are comparable to those of Guo Songtao. Because he used diplomacy to recover Ili from Russia, he was an internationally famous diplomat. When he returned to China, he was determined to promote the modernization of the entire nation. However, he was also opposed by his contemporaries, could not find opportunities to do anything, and soon became angry to death. Since the scholar-bureaucrat class in the Tongguang era was so conservative, are the people more open-minded? In fact, the people and the scholar-bureaucrat class vent their anger from the same nostrils. Our New Deal over the past 60 years has been top-down, not bottom-up. All new undertakings are initiated by a few prophets and are slowly and painstakingly developed. Before the Sino-Japanese War, these few prophets and foresights were all in power. After the Sino-Japanese War, the leadership of the revolution slowly passed into the hands of the opposition. However, these opposition leaders were intellectuals, not the people. Strictly speaking, popular superstition is one of the biggest obstacles to our nation's acceptance of Western culture in modern times. In the fourth quarter, the scholar officials acted rashly. During the Tongji and Guangxu years, although the people were more conservative than the scholar-bureaucrat class, the people were passive, and leadership and governance were in the hands of the scholar-official class. Unfortunately, the scholar-official class of that era, except for a very small number, had no understanding of the general trend of the world at that time. Tongji lasted for 13 years, from 1862 to 1874. During this period, Germany was unified and Italy was unified. The central government of the United States also eliminated the independence movement in the South and restored and strengthened the unity of the United States. That period was a period of great success for nationalism in the West. After the reunification of these countries, great domestic construction and economic development will follow. Before Tongji, the only major powers that practiced imperialism abroad were Britain, Russia, and France. After Tongji, the United States, Germany, and Italy were added. The more competitors there are, the more intense the competition becomes. And before Tongji, Britain was the only industrialized country in the world, and British manufactured products were sold all over the world. After Tongji, virtue, beauty. France has also gradually become industrialized and capitalized. In addition to the competition for political power in the world, there is also new fierce economic competition. Our country's situation during the Guangxu period was far more difficult than that during the Daoguang and Xianfeng periods. Imperialism is our great enemy. This was true during the reign of Tongji and Guangxu, and it is still the case now. Anyone who wants to save the country should understand the true nature of imperialism. Imperialism and capitalism are related. The relationship can be said to have three levels. First, capitalist countries are eager to invest in foreign countries. The more domestic capital there is, the lower the interest rate will be. For example, Britain and the United States have a lot of capital, and it is considered very good if capitalists can get 4% interest. But if British and American capitalists can invest capital in China, India, or South America, the annual interest rate can easily reach 7% or higher. So British and American capitalists competed to invest in undeveloped countries. But accepting capital from foreign countries is not necessarily harmful, and British and American capitalists do not necessarily have political ambitions. Much of the construction of the United States in the second half of the 19th century was carried out using British capital. As a result, the British capitalists certainly benefited, but the United States opened up sources of wealth, and its people benefited even more. Our Pinggan-Hankow Railway was originally built with capital from Belgium. Later, we repaid the principal and interest on time, and the railway became ours. The capitalists in other countries have benefited, and we have benefited even more. Therefore, although Mr. Sun Yat-sen opposed imperialism, he supported China's use of foreign debt for construction. But some capitalists will use political pressure to obtain investment opportunities. There are also political careerists who want to use capital to expand their political power. Any international investment that has a political role is aggressive and imperialist. Any international investment that has no political role is pure, and both investors and recipients can benefit. Therefore, we should adopt the same attitude towards foreign capital as towards water. Sometimes, in some places, and under certain conditions, we should dig wells to draw water, or open rivers to divert water. At other times, places, and conditions, we must build dikes and water. The second level of relationship between imperialism and capitalism is the promotion of business. Capitalist countries all use mechanical manufacturing. The larger the factory, the more products it produces, and the greater the profit. The difficulty lies in the market. Competitive markets in various countries could have relied solely on the quality of goods and low prices. It does not have to rely on military aggression or political pressure. But in the late 19th century, international trade became less free. Countries not only raised their own tariffs, but also raised tariffs in their territories. In this way, the development of commerce will follow the development of political power, and the competition for the market is equivalent to the competition for territory. Once an oppressed country loses its tariff autonomy, it will never be possible to develop industry. Although, most international trade is still trade between equal countries, not trade between empires and dependent territories. The trade volume between the United Kingdom and the United States, Germany, France, and Japan, far greater than the trade volume between Britain and its dependencies. The United Kingdom has the largest number of dependent territories, let alone other countries. The third level of relationship between imperialism and capitalism is the search for raw materials. There is no country in the world that does not rely entirely on imported raw materials. The countries richest in raw materials include Britain. This is true for the United States and Russia, but other countries need more foreign raw materials. Japan and Italy are the poorest. The four basic raw materials of cotton, coal, iron, and oil were lacking in Japan and Italy. Germany is better, but it still does not produce cotton or oil. So, even if a country has many factories, if there is no raw materials, there will be absolutely no solution. Therefore, the imperialists, in search of raw materials for industry, engage in large-scale aggression. Although, capitalism does not necessarily have to practice imperialism before it can obtain raw materials. At the same time, those who sell raw materials are not necessarily the oppressed. For example, among U.S. exports, oil and cotton are bulk commodities. Japan, Germany, and Italy cannot and do not need to be imperialistic by importing oil and cotton from the United States, because the United States not only does not prohibit the export of oil and cotton, but also does its best to promote it. In short, capitalism can turn into imperialism. It does not have to turn into imperialism. Undeveloped countries are susceptible to oppression and aggression by capitalist countries. They can also use foreign capital to develop their own sources of wealth and international trade to improve people's living standards. Capitalism is like water. Water can provide irrigation, facilitate transportation, or cause disasters. It depends on how people deal with it. At the same time, we should not take imperialism too simply and think that without capitalism, there would be no imperialism in the world. 700 years ago, the Mongols were still in the nomadic age. There is no capital or industry, but their aggression against me is still greater than that of modern capitalist countries. The same was true for the Manchus 300 years ago. In the West, the Arabs in the Middle Ages used force to promote Islam and promoted their religious imperialism. At the end of the 18th century, French revolutionaries used force to force foreign countries to accept their freedom and equality, and promoted their revolutionary imperialism. As far as we know, there have been various political systems in history, whether monarchy or democracy, various social and economic systems, whether capitalism or feudalism. Whether it is communism or not, it is possible to practice imperialism. The scholar officials of the Tongguang era had no understanding of the dangers of the era and the application of international relations. They only know how to destroy the self-improvement movement advocated by Li Hongzhang and others. At the same time, they are very busy. If the government listened to them, China would hardly be at war with foreign countries every day of the year. During the Taiping Rebellion in the Yangtze River Basin, Nian bandits in the north, and Hui rebellions in Shaanxi, Gansu, and Xinjiang, the Qing government ordered Zhuo Zongtang to lead the Hunan army to recover the northwest. Russia took advantage of my revolt and occupied Ili. This is Russia's habit of taking advantage of others' misfortune. In the 19th century, Russia occupied the most of our lands. In the last years of Xianfeng's reign, Russia took advantage of the Taiping Rebellion and the British and French forces to occupy my country's territory north of Heilongjiang and east of Ushuri, totaling 300,000 square miles. The current Amur and Primorai provinces in Russia, including Vladivostok, were robbed during that time. At the end of Tongji, when Russia occupied western Xinjiang and the Qing court protested, Russia pretended that it had no territorial ambitions and that it only represented our protection of Ili. Wait until we calm down the chaos. He must return the land to us. In fact, Russia predicts that China will never be able to quell the rebellion, and China will never be able to extend its influence to Xinjiang. Then Russia can not only annex Ili, but also encroach on the entire Xinjiang. China has no recourse for the time being. I have no choice but to regard Ili as an unsolved case between China and Russia. Zhuo Zongtang's military success was not only unexpected by Russia, but also unexpected by ourselves. He recovered Shaanxi and Gansu one after another. In the first year of Guangxu, he was preparing to attack Xinjiang, and military expenditure became a big problem. From the 30th year of Daoguang's reign, when Hong Xiuquan launched his army, to the first year of Guangxu's reign, for 25 years, China was constantly in the midst of civil strife and civil war. It was exhausted. How could it continue to manage Xinjiang? In addition, transportation is inconvenient. Xinjiang has complex ethnic groups in a vast area, so success or failure seems uncertain. A big debate ensued. Zhuo Zongtang was very fond of making great achievements, and he focused on attacking. He said that descendants have no reason to give up the land left by their ancestors. He also said that if Xinjiang is not preserved, Shaanxi Gansu cannot be preserved, Shaanxi Gansu cannot be preserved, Shaanxi cannot be preserved, and Shaanxi cannot be preserved, Hebei cannot be preserved. His reasons seemed to be sufficient. The remarks were very passionate. Li Hongzhang's view is exactly the opposite of Zhuo's. Li said that since China occupied Xinjiang during the Qianlong period, China has not received any benefits and has wasted money on military garrison. This is a real situation. He also said that China's great disaster was not in the northwest but in the coastal provinces in the east, because the coastal provinces were the essence of China, and the oppression of the imperialists was more in the east than in the west. Since the Japanese restoration, Li Hongzhang has become even more anxious. He feels that Japan is China's real enemy because Japan is bent on pursuing me and he has no plans. Moreover, they are so close that it is easier to mobilize troops. As for the Western countries' mutual restraint, their outward development is not limited to the Far East. They are far apart and cannot use their troops casually. Therefore, Li Hongzhang advocated not attacking Xinjiang but concentrating the country's manpower and material resources on coastal defense and the development of hinterland provinces. Although the border provinces are important, if there are losses in the hinterland, the general situation of the country will be lost. On the other hand, if the hinterland becomes stronger, border provinces and vassals were naturally preserved. Zhuo Zongtang's remarks are more pleasant, while Li's are more reasonable. Zhuo is high-profile, while Li is low-key. The scholar-bureaucrat class has always advocated sentiments and sang a high profile, so of course they supported Zhuo Zongtang. So we borrowed foreign debt and diverted construction costs from each province. For Zhuo Zongtang's attack on Xinjiang. Zhuo Zongtang is so lucky. Because internal strife broke out in Xinjiang, there was no strong resistance. At the end of Guangxu's 30th year, he conquered all Xinjiang. China sent Chongho as a special envoy to Russia to negotiate for the return of Ili. Although the treaty concluded by Chongho recovered the city of Ili, almost all the land to the west of the city was ceded to Russia, and the strategic transportation areas in southern and northern Xinjiang were also ceded. In addition, Chongho also granted very important trade rights, such as the establishment of a Russian consulate in Xinjiang and the trade route from Gansu and Shaanxi to Hankow, and navigation rights on the Songhua River in Jilin. The scholar-bureaucrat class advocated killing Chongho, breaking the treaty, and preparing for war. This was the time when young commentators such as Zhang Jidong, Zhang Peiluan, and Chen Baochen first emerged. The Qin court was actually moved. So he hurriedly mobilized his troops and generals until it was time to actually prepare for war. The government found it difficult, first, from Ili to the Tumun River in the northeast corner of Goryeo, defenses must be fortified everywhere along the border between China and Russia. Where are there so many troops? Zhuozongtang's troops in Xinjiang, which bore the brunt, were too tired and unwilling to fight. Second, the Russian Far East Fleet pretended to be impressive and sailed from Vladivostok to the Ocean of Japan. Therefore, China must fortify its coastal areas along the Yangtze River. The Qing government appointed Peng Yulin to supervise the Yangtze River Navy to deal with the Russian Navy. Peng Yulin wanted to carry a load of tung oil and firewood to the Ocean of Japan to carry out a fire attack. Lu Kunyi, the governor of Liangjiang, joked with him, saying that the era was not the Three Kingdoms, the commander was not Kong Ming, and the fire attack strategy might not work. Li Hongzhang was of course extremely angry when he saw the scholar harming the country. However, the anti-war sentiment was very high and he did not dare to make peace publicly. He had no choice but to use means. He invited General Gordon, a famous British military officer, as a military advisor. Gordon is an honest man who likes to tell the truth. During the last years of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, he led the so-called ever-victorious army and made many meritorious deeds. Therefore, the Qing court and ordinary scholar bureaucrats trusted him. What is his opinion? He said, if China wants to fight Russia, it must do three things. 1. Move the capital to Xi'an. 2. Prolong the war of resistance for at least 10 years. 3. The Manchus are prepared to give up their power, because in a long-term war, the Qing regime will definitely not be able to maintain it. After listening to Gordon's opinion, the Qing court decided to seek peace. As a result, a farce in our country's modern history did not begin. Fortunately, in the third or fourth year of Guangxu's reign, Russia was at war with Turkey, and its relationship with Britain was also very tense, so it did not want to get into trouble. Fortunately, China had a young diplomat named Zheng Jiza at that time. Use a very calm mind and a very strong will to implement his ideas. It turned out that the treaty signed by Chongho had not been approved by the government and had not yet been formally established. Zheng Jiza used diplomatic skills to recover most of the trade rights and land, but the compensation price was doubled, totaling 9 million rubles. The British ambassador to Russia praised Zheng Jiza and said, Marquis Zheng is the first person to retrieve the land she has occupied from Russia through diplomacy. When the conflict between China and Russia over Ili came to an end, the conflict between China and France over Vietnam began. China turns out to be an imperialist country. In addition to our headquarters, our territory also includes Burma, Siam, Vietnam, Ryukyu, Korea, Mongolia, and Tibet. These places can be divided into two categories. Mongolia and Tibet belong to the first category and are under the jurisdiction of vassal bureaus, with ministers sent by the imperial court to be stationed there. The second category includes Korea, Vietnam, and other dependent countries. In fact, China's relationship with them is very shallow. They only pay tribute on a regular basis, and the new king's accession to the throne must be granted by the Chinese emperor. In addition, we do not send permanent representatives to their capitals, nor do we interfere in their internal affairs. On the economic front, we are also very passive. We do not immigrate, and we do not encourage trade. It's simply a waste of money. But why did our ancestors bother to acquire these lands? There are reasons for this. Mr. Zhou Durun, a bachelor of the Hanlin Academy in the 7th year of Guangxu, 1881, said it clearly. I heard that the emperor is guarding the 4 barbarians, and this is a plan that is far-reaching and worrying. Since ancient times, enemies have invaded foreign countries. The concealment is very slight, but the accumulation is very early. If you don't guard the 4 barbarians but guard the border, it will be beyond your reach. If you don't guard the border but guard the hinterland, it will be even worse. Our dynasty has a vast territory, including Longsha and Yanhai, and is full of vassals and vassals. Use Ryukyu to defend the southeast, Goryeo to defend the northeast, Mongolia to defend the northwest, and Vietnam to defend the southwest. Isn't it the so-called mountain and river development, and sharing the same fate with the country? In other words, historically, vassal states have been the outer line of our national defense and guarded the door on our behalf. In ancient times, this statement had considerable truth. In modern times, the situation is very different. During the Daoguang period, the British directly attacked Guangdong, Fujian. In Zhejiang and Jiangsu, the British and French Allied forces entered Beijing directly. The so-called national defense perimeter was of no use. If we still want to maintain the outside line in this era, we should also change our plans. We should help these weak countries become independent, because independent Korea, Ryukyu, Vietnam, Myanmar must not invade us. What we fear is not that they will become independent, but that they will become puppets of the imperialists. In any case, since outsiders are directly attacking our hinterland, we have no time to worry about the outside lines. Assisting these weak countries to achieve independence is revolutionary diplomacy. Just like in the early years of the Soviet Revolution, suffering from external oppression by foreign powers and internal counter-revolutionary resistance, Lenin resolutely gave up the vassal state of Imperial Russia. When France attacked Vietnam, most of the scholar official class advocated using force to assist Vietnam. Zhang Peiluan, Chen Baochen, Zhang Jidong and others were particularly excited. Li Hongzhang objected. His reason is to concentrate on quickly preparing for the national defense undertakings in the hinterland. On the one hand, the Qing court was afraid of Qing Yi's criticism, and on the other hand, it was afraid that aiding Vietnam would cause a war between China and France, so it was hesitant. At first, it was secretly supporting Vietnam's military expenditure and weapons, but later it actually caused a war between China and France. At that time, officials did not distinguish between civil and military officials, and literati were especially good at talking about military affairs. Beijing then sent Zhang Peiluan, a fierce member of the main militant faction, to defend the Fuzhou shipyard. Chen Baochen went to help with the defense of Liangjiang. No need to say. Gentlemen who talk on paper are of no use. When the French Navy attacked the shipyard, Zhang Peiluan escaped as quickly as possible. Chen Baochen not only did not contribute to the actual situation in Liangjiang, but also stopped making comments. After a short period of fighting, peace was made. As soon as the peace agreement was concluded, there was fighting again, and then they still accepted France's conditions. Vietnam was not saved, and our national defense forces suffered heavy losses. The Fuzhou shipyard founded by Zhuo Zongtang was destroyed by France at this time. Section 5, the first decisive battle between China and Japan. Li Hongzhang clearly saw that Japan was China's strong enemy in the early years of Japan's Meiji Restoration. He also knew that the outcome of China and Japan would depend on which country's new armaments progressed faster. He paid special attention to the navy, because Japan must first win at sea and then attack the mainland. Therefore, he opposed Zhuozongtang's use of force to regain Xinjiang, and opposed going to war with Russia over the Ili issue. Opposed to war with France over Vietnam. He wants to save all these war expenses to expand the navy. His vision is far beyond that of ordinary people. Li Hongzhang paid special attention to Sino-Japanese relations and had to pay special attention to Korea. Goryeo position in national defense was extremely important. Because Goryeo can be used as a base area for the enemy's army to invade our northeast, and it can also be used as a base area for the enemy's navy to invade our Shandong and Hebei provinces. On the other hand, Goryeo's position in Japan's national defense is also very important. With Korea in our hands, Japan still feels uneasy. Once occupied by Russia or Britain, Japan would feel an even greater threat. Therefore, Goryeo is also a battleground for Japan. In the early years of Guangxu, King Li Shi of Goryeo was young, and his father Li Shiying, the king of Dayuan, was regent. Mr. Dayuan is a very conservative person. He killed missionaries many times, and he was determined not to do business with outsiders. Before the Meiji Restoration, Japan-Korea relations, on the Japanese side, were presided over by the shogunate and executed by the princes of Tsushima. After the Restoration, power returned to the Japanese emperor, so the negotiations between Japan and South Korea were changed to be hosted by the Japanese central government. Daewonjin hated Japan's reform and refused to interact with the new Japan. The old feudal warriors in Japan advocated conquest of Korea. In addition to Goryeo's refusal to interact with Japan, this movement to conquer Korea also had three motives. 1. Japan cannot become strong if it does not develop overseas. 2. Japan does not make the first move. Western countries, especially Russia, may take action. 3. Conquest of Korea can provide a way out for ordinary samurai who are unwilling to succeed. In the first year of Guangxu, i.e. the 8th year of Meiji in Japan, a case in which Goryeo bombarded Japanese ships occurred, the so-called Ganghwa Island incident. Those who advocate conquering Korea have even more excuses. At that time, Japanese political leaders such as Iwakura, Okubo, Ito, and Inoue originally opposed the conquest of Korea. They believe that before the reform cause has developed to a considerable extent, we should not act rashly in an attempt to expand outward. But after the Ganghwa Island incident, they felt that they could not suppress public opinion and had to take the initiative. On the one hand, they sent Kuroda Saitaka and Inoue to lead the fleet to Goryeo to negotiate a treaty of trade and friendship, and on the other hand, they sent Sun Yuli to Beijing to test China's attitude and avoid China's resistance. Sun Yuli started a debate with our diplomatic authorities. We have always insisted that Goryeo is our vassal state. If Japan invades Goryeo, it will be unfriendly to China, and China cannot sit idly by. Mori Yuli said that China's suzerainty in Korea was nominal. Because China has no responsibilities in Goryeo, it has no rights. Negotiations between Kuroda and Inoue in Goryeo were successful. The treaty they signed recognized Korea as an independent country. This is a denial of China's suzerainty. China should protest and try to correct it. However, although Japan and Goryeo both sent articles to China, Beijing did not protest to Japan, nor did it blame Goryeo for not abiding by its duties. China is really misunderstood by traditional concepts. According to traditional Chinese concepts, as long as Korea recognized China as its suzerain, that would be enough. Whether the third country recognizes it or not is irrelevant. In the early years of Guangxu, China's prestige in Korea was very high, so the government was reassured and did not pay attention to the Japan-Korea Treaty. After the issue of the treaty between Korea and Japan was resolved, the Ryukyu conflict broke out between China and Japan. Ryukyu has been affiliated to China since the 15th year of Hongwu in the Ming Dynasty, 1372. For more than 500 years, Ryukyu has paid tribute on a regular basis without interruption. However, in the 30th year of Wanli in the Ming Dynasty, 1602, Ryukyu claimed vassal status from the Samad princes of Japan and became two vassals, just like one woman was promised to marry two men. Fortunately, these two men had never met, so this strange phenomenon existed quietly for more than 270 years. Since the Japanese restoration and the abolition of vassals, Ryukyu was considered by Japan as a vassal of Samadhi and should be abolished. Japan initially prevented Ryukyu from paying tribute to China. Eventually Ryukyu was changed to a Japanese prefecture. Of course China is opposed to it, and some people advocate tough dealing with Japan, but Japan actually chose the right time, because this is the time when China and Russia are competing for Ili. China had no choice but to treat Ryukyu as an unsolved problem. But the Ryukyu issue exposed Japan's ambitions. The scholar bureaucrats who usually looked down on Japan now knew they should be on guard. If Japan can destroy Ryukyu, it can also destroy Goryeo. Ryukyu may not be contested, but Goryeo must be contested. So they concentrated on planning how to preserve Goryeo. In the 5th or 6th year of Guangxu's reign, China could be said to have had a Goryeo policy for the first time. Li Hongzhang believed that Japan had territorial ambitions towards Goryeo, while Western countries only wanted to trade and proselytize Goryeo. Under this situation, Britain, the United States, and France had more rights in Korea. The more they want to oppose Japanese aggression. In the 5th year of Guangxu's reign, Li Hongzhang wrote a letter to Li Yuyuan, an important figure in Korea, which made it very clear. For the current plan, it seems appropriate to use the strategy of fighting poison with poison to defeat the enemy, and take advantage of the opportunity to make treaties with various countries in Europe and the West in order to contain Japan. Japan relies on its deceptive power. The plan to destroy Ryukyu with the intention of swallowing up whales and cannibalism has emerged. Your country cannot be unprepared. However, the one who Japan is afraid of is Taixi. It may be insufficient to control Japan with the power of Korea, but it is more than enough to control Japan through unification and trade with the West. After 3 years of exhortation and campaign, only then did Korea accept this new policy. In the spring of the 8th year of Guangxu's reign, introduced by China, Goryeo concluded a trade treaty with Britain, the United States, Germany and France. Unfortunately, civil strife broke out in Goryeo at this time. The king's father, de Yuanjun Li Shiying, opposed the New Deal and feared that the Queen's Min family would be in power. In June of the 8th year of Guangxu's reign, he suddenly instigated a mutiny, besieged the Japanese embassy, and killed prominent Min people. Li Hongzhang's advisor Xue Fuqing suggested that China quickly send troops to Goryeo to quell the civil strife, both to express China's suzerainty and to prevent Japan. China sent Wu Chongqing to lead his Hui army directly into the capital of Goryeo. There were two young men under Wu Chongqing, Zhang Jian and Yuan Shikai. They were very courageous, and the Goryeo soldiers had no ability to resist. So they first sent King Daiyuan to Tianjin, and then sent troops to occupy the dangerous strategic points of Seoul. In a few hours, Li Shiying's army was dispersed. Wu Chongqing now actually became the master of Goryeo. Later, Goryeo promised to pay compensation to Japan and promised the Japanese embassy to retain its guards. In this way, China and Japan both had troops in Kyoto, forming a confrontation. The beginning of summer in the 8th year. China's victory in Seoul caused many people to underestimate the enemy. Zhang Jian advocated simply destroying Goryeo. Zhang Peiluan and Deng Qingxiu suggested that Li Hongzhang set up a base camp in Yantai, mobilize the navy and army, and prepare to declare war on Japan. Zhang Peiluan said, "Since Japan reformed its laws, the people have hated it and wanted to return to feudalism." Then he wanted to reform the civil affairs. The two parties, Sa and Chang, are competing for power. The national debt is piling up, and paper is used as currency. Although the military system is similar to that of Wu Taishi, there are no generals outside and no advisors inside. When asked about the division's ships, the Fuso ship was the top one. It was corroded by iron and the wood was not resistant to wind and waves. The rest were just small cannons and boats. They went to China's Dingyuan iron ship. He is extremely brave and shows great power. When asked about the number of his troops, the army has 40,000 to 50,000 men and the navy has 3,000 to 4,000 men. There are many officials and soldiers who are short of vacancies. Recently, idlers have been recruited to fill the army. In the battle formation, most of them were timid, and the armies in Huaixiang, China were far away. Deng Qingxiu also said this. Hibiscus soil. However, the two mainland industries are careful. The total cash in the central government is less than 5 million taels. If you are in such embarrassment, why serve your country? The navy is less than 8,000, and half of the ships are in ruins. The army is divided into 6 towns. According to statistics, there are less than 40,000 on land and water, and the army is not elite. However, those who dare to disregard it must not know how big China is. It's not that we don't know that China is rich and powerful, but we rely on China's fear of trouble, and China's repeated attacks are difficult to detect. These two self-proclaimed Japan experts see things too easily. Li Hongzhang saw it more clearly. He said, "Since the reform, he has been bent on flattering the Westerners and wants nothing more than to steal their thoughts. Think of it as a self-defeating technique." This year, Senator Hirobumi Ito was sent to Europe to inspect civil affairs, Prince Yusukawa was sent back to Russia, and an envoy was dispatched to Italy to station in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They looked at each other on the road, and their attention was on establishing the party through friendship. Westerners are also happy to attach themselves to him whenever they encounter Sino-Japanese negotiations. Often intended to be protective. Since the country has a lot of foreign debt and is facing a crisis, the Westerners are protecting it for the sake of self-protection and financial gain, or they may be hiding it. It is taboo for military strategists to reveal the appearance of plotting against a man before he has any tools to plot against him. Japan is following the Western approach step by step, although it is only similar in appearance, but all its ships and guns are enough to rival us. If we have to fight thousands of miles across the sea to win or lose, and control his death, I dare not say that I am sure. Secondly, there is no need to do anything about the Eastern expedition, but the ambition to do so is indispensable. China cannot wait a day to slow down its recruitment of new naval officers. In the past, the Ministry of Household Affairs allocated a total of 4 million taels per year for coastal defense funds for Beiyang and South China. It is nothing like the wealth that can be directed. Not all money is available. According to statistics, the defense expenditures for the North and South Ocean released by various provincial customs offices are only about 1/4 of the original allocation. Could you request an order to the Prime Minister's Office of the Ministry of Household Affairs to verify the actual amount of defense expenses collected by Nanbeing every year, so as to ensure that the original 4 million taels are met? So 5 years later, the two branches of the Northern and Southern Navy can be successful. After this great debate ended, the Vietnam issue arose again. Zhang Peiluan, Deng Qingxiu and others suddenly forgot about Japan and launched a major campaign to start a war with France. When China and France go to war together, Japan's opportunity will come. At this time, the party, government and army of Goryeo were facing each other. On one side is the Enlightenment Party, whose leaders are Hong Il-sik, Kim Ok-kyun, and Park Young-hyo, and whose backing is the Japanese minister Shinichiro Takesoi. This faction is pro-Japanese and wants to use Japan's power to achieve independence. If something happens to the other side, go to the party. The leaders are Kim Il-sik. Min Yongyi and Yin Taijun were supported by Yuan Shikai. This faction belongs to the Lianhua and wants to be under our protection to avoid oppression by Japan and other countries. The army in Seoul consisted of the Chinese garrison and the Goryeo army trained by Yuan Shikai. Opposite are the guards of the Japanese embassy and the Goryeo army trained by Japanese officers. Before the Sino-French War broke out, the Enlightenment Party could not raise its head. After it started, Zhu Tian became active, saying that China had too much time to take care of itself, so how could it take care of Korea? So Hong Yingji and others decided to make a big move. On the night of October 17th, the 10th year of Guangxu's reign, Hong Yingji hosted a banquet for the diplomatic corps and Korean dignitaries. Representatives from various countries were present, but Zhu Tian was the only one who said he was not sick. Then suddenly a fire alarm was called, and everyone present panicked. Min Yongyi went out and was killed by soldiers who had set up an ambush. Hong Yingji ran into the palace and declared a mutiny in China. The king was forced to move, and Zhu Tian was summoned to lead Japanese soldiers into the palace to defend it. Zhu Tian was not only free of illness at this time, but also led the team into the palace himself. After the king was in the hands of the Enlightenment Party, he issued an edict to summon the leader of the party. They were killed as soon as they entered the palace. So he declared independence and sent people who enlightened the party to form a government. On October 19th, Yuan Shikai brought the Goryeo soldiers he had trained and the Chinese troops stationed in Seoul into the palace. China and Japan started fighting in the Goryeo palace. Zhu Tian saw that he could not resist, so he retreated. The palace and the king were again in the hands of Yuan Shikai. Hong Il-sik and Park Young-hyo were killed by rebel soldiers. Jin Yujun fled to Incheon with Zhu Tian and later defected to Japan. All political power returned to the Shandong Party and Yuan Shikai, and the Enlightenment Party was completely disbanded. Yuan Shikai, who was still under 30 at this time, suddenly encountered a major event. He was unable to ask for instructions due to the unreachable telegraph, so he had to act cheaply. He dares to take responsibility boldly. Stop the other party's conspiracy. No wonder Li Hongzhang valued him from then on and sent him as the general representative in Korea. Zhu Tian is a Ronin diplomat. If he did not violate the will of the Japanese government, at least he exceeded the scope set by his government. After the incident, the Japanese government used peaceful negotiations with Korea and China. In the spring of the 11th year of Guangxu's reign, Ito and Li Hongzhang signed the Tianjin Agreement, under which both sides withdrew their troops stationed in Goryeo. However, if there was civil strife in Goryeo in the future, both China and Japan would have to mobilize troops into Goryeo. In the 11th year of Guangxu. In 1885, Britain and Russia almost went to war because of the problem in Afghanistan. Their conflict spread to the Far East. In order to prevent the Russian Navy from moving south from Vladivostok, the British suddenly occupied Jumo Island south of Goryeo. Russia then attempted to occupy Yonghung Bay in the northeast of Goryeo. Seeing that Japan was unreliable, the Koreans had secret connections with Russia and sought protection from Russia. Under this situation, Britain felt dangerous, and Japan was even more afraid that Britain and Russia would gain power in Goryeo. Therefore, Japan and the United Kingdom encouraged China to adopt active policies in Goryeo. Britain felt that Korea would be harmless to Britain in the hands of China, but if it fell into the hands of Russia, it would be very detrimental to Britain. Japan also feels that if Goryeo is in the hands of China, it will still have a way to seize it in the future. Once it is in the hands of Russia, it will be a fatal injury to Japan. Therefore, this situation is extremely beneficial to us, and Li Hongzhang and Yuan Shikai carried out their active policies. From the 11th to 20th year of Guangxu's reign, China's policy toward Goryeo was entirely that of Li Hongzhang and Yuan Shikai. First of all, they tightly controlled Goryeo's finances, and Goryeo wanted to borrow foreign debt. They tried to stop it. When Goryeo's finances were completely helpless, they asked the China Merchants Bureau to lend money to Goryeo. Goryeo's customs is managed by Chinese customs personnel, which can be said to be a branch of China Customs. The Korean Telegraph Office was established and managed by the technical staff of the Chinese Telegraph Office using Chinese materials. Before Goryeo sends an envoy to a foreign country, he must first obtain China's consent. After arriving in a foreign country, Goryeo's envoy must abide by 3 conditions. 1. Korean envoys first arrived in various countries. You should first report to the Chinese embassy, and ask the Chinese imperial envoy to accompany you to the outside world. There will be no formal decision in the future. 1. When there is a banquet or social gathering between the DPRK and the DPRK, the Korean envoy should follow the Chinese imperial envoy. 1. When negotiating important matters, the Korean envoy should first consult with the Chinese imperial envoy in secret for verification. Although this policy improved China's status in Goryeo, it was absolutely opposite to the Goryeo policy originally formulated by Li Hongzhang in the 5th year of Guangxu's reign. Initially, Li wanted Korea to have more contacts with Western countries, hoping to use Western trade and missionary rights to resist Japan's territorial ambitions. At this time Yuan's policy was to monopolize Goryeo for China. By the 18th or 19th year of Guangxu's reign, Japan felt that China's power in Goryeo had expanded too much, and wanted to confront China. Since China monopolizes the rights of Goryeo, when the crisis comes, of course only China will bear the brunt. The direct cause of the Sino-Japanese War was the civil strife in Goryeo. In the 20th year of Guangxu, 1894 AD, there was the so-called Dongxue Party in southern Goryeo, which gathered thousands of people to cause chaos. China and Japan sent troops at the same time. China helped quell the civil strife, and Japan used the excuse to defend its overseas residence and embassy. However, the place where the Donghak Party caused chaos was still far away from Seoul. There were no Japanese overseas residents there, and Japan sent many troops, far more than needed to protect the overseas Chinese. Li Hongzhang knew that Japan had other ambitions, so he tried his best to quell the Dongxue Party rebellion first so that Japan would have no excuse. But after the civil unrest was calmed down, Japan still will not withdraw its troops. Japan claimed that the root cause of Goryeo's civil strife was the lack of clarity in internal affairs, and demanded that China and Japan jointly force Goryeo to reform its internal affairs. Li refused, because this was the Sino-Japanese condominium in Korea. At this time, Japanese public opinion was very fierce and they were determined to fight. Public opinion in China is also fierce. Li Hongzhang was asked to send troops quickly and strike preemptively. The scholar bureaucrats believed that Korea must not be lost, because if Korea were lost, the Northeast could not be protected. They thought that Japan's national power was very small. Japanese people do not measure their virtues and dare to compete with the superior country. In fact, they use their mantis arms to block the chariot. When China comes, it is like destroying dry matter. Li Hongzhang felt that once the troops were mobilized, the two sides would become like tigers, and eventually they couldn't stop. But he did not give in to diplomacy. His approach of being passive in military affairs and active in diplomacy is very strange, and he has his reasons. Russian Minister Cassini agreed to him. Russia will persuade Japan to withdraw its troops. If Japan does not listen, Russia will use coercive methods. Li felt that with Russia's assistance, there was no need to make concessions to Japan. Little did I know that although Cassini was willing to provide me with assistance, the Russian government was not willing. It turned out to be a big problem in the war. It is not something that a minister can decide. By the time Li Hongzhang discovered that Cassini's words could not be fulfilled, the Sino-Japanese diplomatic line had been severed and the war had begun. China and Japan declared war on the first day of July. August 18th, September 17th in the Gregorian calendar. The two navies met at the mouth of the Yalu River northwest of Goryeo. That naval war was the most important war for our nation before this all-out war of resistance. If we win, Korea will be protected, there will be no problems in the northeast, and in the Far East, China will be superior to Japan. Therefore, the naval battle on August 18th during the Sino-Japanese War was an epoch-making war worthy of our study. At that time, our country's naval power was greater than that of Japan's navy. Our navy ranks 8th in the world, and Japan ranks 11th. Our two battleships, Dingyuan and Jinyuan, are each 7,000 tons. Japan's largest warship is only 4,000 tons. But the Japanese Navy also has advantages. Japanese ships are faster than ours, and they have more cannons on board than ours, and they fire faster. Our ships are too uneven, and the Japanese ones are more suitable. Therefore, materially speaking, the navies of the two countries are not far apart. There were many reasons for our failure that time. First, strategies are inferior to people. Our original fleet was arranged in a human formation, with the two armored ships of Dingyuan and Jinyuan taking the lead, being the main force in the battle. Navy Admiral Ding Ruchang took Dingyuan as his ship, and the captain was Lu Buchan. Ding Ben was a cavalry officer and did not understand the navy. He was a loyal man with a lot of integrity, and Li Hongzhang only relied on him as a spiritual leader. Lu Buchan is a graduate of the British Naval Academy, and his academic performance is indeed top-notch. He is quite familiar with Shakespeare's plays and has the demeanor of a so-called Confucian general. Ding considered himself inferior to Lu. So it was actually Lu Zhua who was in command. When the two armies faced each other, Lu Hu ordered the human formation to be completely turned upside down. The two armored ships of Dingyuan and Jinyuan were at the back, and the smaller ships on the two wings were at the front. Lu Shi was timid and wanted to save himself. As a result, the front line was in chaos. The crew of the boat were panicked. Moreover, Japan has to seize the opportunity to attack our weaknesses first. Secondly, our tactics are inferior to others. Tyler, the British chief gunner on the Dingyuan ship at the time, saw Lu Buchan changing his formation and knew that the situation was not good. He first told the gunners not to fire too far away and not to fire randomly, because there were not many cannonballs on the ship and they would surely hit before firing. After giving the order, he went up to the observation deck and stood next to Admiral Ding, ready to help Admiral Ding give orders. Dante didn't understand English and Taylor didn't understand Chinese, so the two had to communicate with gestures. Soon the gunner opened fire, and the first shot accidentally hit his own lookout. Ding was seriously injured and was no longer in command throughout the battle. Taylor was also slightly injured. The accuracy of Japanese artillery shells was far superior to ours. As a result, our navy suffered heavy losses and no longer dared to fight the Japanese at sea. The Japanese controlled the sea. The Army's transport has freedom of movement, but we must detour through Shanhaiguan. In fact, after the Navy failed, big things happened. The defeat of the Army was even worse than that of the Navy. In March of the following year, Li Hongzhang and Ito signed the peace treaty of Shimonoseki. China agreed to Korea's independence and ceded Taiwan and the Liaodong Peninsula. The compensation is 20,000 taels. Modern war is certainly no child's play. Of course, if you seek peace without fighting, you will suffer losses. This time, it is the condominium of Goryeo that will suffer. But if you seek peace after defeat, you will suffer far greater losses than if you make peace without a fight. Political leaders during the Tongji and Guangxu years such as Zheng, Zhua, Li, and Prince Gong Wenxiang and others originally wanted to avoid war while trying their best to strengthen themselves. Unfortunately, people at that time did not allow them to do so.